Admiral Uma's silvery scales reflect the dim emergency lighting of the Voth command bridge as another explosion rocks her flagship. The tactical display shows what she already knows: her defensive fleet is being systematically destroyed by the Drachnid Empire's warships. 5 years of bitter warfare, and now their last major staging ground before the Voth homeworld is about to fall. Admiral, hull breach on decks 3 through 5. The Drachnid dreadnoughts are pressing their advantage. Her tactical officer reports, voice tight with tension. Uma's ceremonial command markings earned through decades of service feel heavy on her scales as she watches another Voth cruiser disappear from her tactical display. Colony World VX-227's orbital space has become a graveyard of Voth ships, their superior numbers meaning nothing against the Drachnid's overwhelming firepower. The communications panel chimes with an urgent priority signal from Voth High Command. Uma accepts it, expecting evacuation orders. Instead, the message brings something entirely unexpected: hope. Admiral Uma, our diplomatic corps has successfully negotiated immediate military support from a newly contacted spacefaring species, humans, the High Command representative announces. Commander Aaron Parker's battle group is arriving at your position. They bring unconventional capabilities. The tactical data streaming alongside the transmission shows 5 warships of unfamiliar design. Their flagship, designated TSS Thermopylae, carries weapons systems Uma has never encountered: experimental mass drivers and adaptive shield technology that defies current understanding of defensive systems. Unknown signatures detected. The sensor officer calls out. FTL emergence directly behind the Drachnid fleet. Uma watches in fascination as the human vessels materialize precisely where no commander would expect: behind the exposed rear of the Drachnid assault fleet. The human ships are smaller, more compact than their Drachnid counterparts, but they move with startling agility. Commander Parker's voice comes through clear on the command channel. Voth Command, this is TSS Thermopylae. Will handle their rear guard. Concentrate your remaining forces on their forward elements. The humans' attack pattern defies all standard combat doctrine. Where Voth and Drachnid fleets maneuver in rigid formations, the human ships weave through debris fields, executing impossibly tight turns and firing their mass drivers with devastating precision. Their adaptive shields flare with each hit but hold steady, confounding Drachnid targeting systems. All remaining Voth vessels form up on my position, Uma orders, her initial skepticism about these alien reinforcements transforming into fierce hope. Coordinate fire with our human allies. Today, we show the Drachnids that the tide of this war has turned. As her ships move to comply, Uma watches the tactical display with growing satisfaction. For the first time in 5 years of losing this war, they might have found the edge they need not through superior numbers or familiar tactics, but through the chaos and innovative combat doctrine these humans bring to the battlefield. The TSS Thermopylae's engines flared brilliant blue as Commander Parker initiated the Terran Hammer strike. His ships broke formation, scattering in seemingly random vectors that left ghostly trails through the debris field. Admiral Uma tracked their movements on her tactical display, noting how the apparent chaos willpowered into a precise pattern of coordinated attacks. Multiple impacts detected on Drachnid vessels. Lieutenant James Mitchell's voice cut through the command channel. Their engine clusters show harmonic vulnerabilities at frequencies our mass drivers can exploit, transmitting targeting data now. Uma's tactical officers integrated the incoming data streams. The information revealed critical weaknesses in Drachnid shield configurations, gaps their own sensors had never detected. All ships, adjust weapon frequencies according to human tactical data, she ordered. The Drachnid dreadnought's precision formations began to splinter as Parker's ships struck from unexpected angles. Warprince Korthak's flagship, the Eternal Dominion, vented atmosphere from multiple hull breaches as synchronized fire from human and Voth vessels penetrated its shields. Admiral, detecting shield modulation attempts from the enemy fleet, UMA's sensor chief reported. They're trying to adapt. Mitchell's voice crackled through again. Confirmed. Their power distribution network has a critical flaw, routing new targeting solutions to your gunners. The Voth crews adapted quickly to the humans' fluid combat style. UMA watched as her remaining cruisers abandoned their traditional attack patterns, instead mirroring the Thermopylae's erratic approach vectors. 3 Drachnid heavy cruisers erupted in spectacular chain reactions as combined fire struck their newly exposed vulnerabilities. The Thermopylae's electronic warfare suite activated, flooding space with interference patterns that scattered Drachnid targeting locks. Warprince Korthak's voice boomed across all frequencies, a rare breach of combat protocol that revealed his growing frustration. Reform defensive lines. Do not let these vermin dictate the flow of battle. But the Drachnid commander's experience showed as he deployed his reserve ships in a swift pincer movement. The massive vessels moved to encircle the combined human Voth force, threatening to trap them between overwhelming firepower. Admiral UMA, Parker called. My sensor officer is detecting unusual energy signatures from the Drachnid fleet. They're spooling up something big. UMA studied the readings on her own display. The energy patterns defied analysis by both Voth and human systems. Whatever weapon the Drachnids prepared to unveil, it represented an unknown threat to their newfound advantage. Commander Parker, can your electronic warfare systems disrupt those energy buildups? UMA asked, scales shifting as she considered their options. Negative. The signatures are like nothing in our database. Parker's voice remained steady despite the tension. Lieutenant Mitchell is analyzing potential countermeasures but will need time. The Eternal Dominion's damaged hull blazed with crackling energy as Korthak's unknown weapon system charged. Around it, the pincer movement of reserve ships tightened, forcing UMA's fleet closer to the humans' position. The space between the opposing forces filled with weapons fire, creating a lethal maze of energy beams and mass driver rounds. Mitchell's targeting algorithms continued to find weak points in the Drachnid shields, but the enemy's numerical advantage began to tell. For every Drachnid ship they disabled, 2 more moved to fill the gap. The parameter of space where the human Voth fleet could maneuver grew steadily smaller. Energy spike, Mitchell warned. Whatever they're charging, it's nearly ready to fire. UMA watched the tactical display as the Drachnid ship's power signatures shifted into unknown configurations. Their combined fleets had struck a decisive blow against the enemy, but now they faced a weapon that neither humanity's innovative combat doctrine nor the Voth's centuries of experience had prepared them to counter. Lieutenant Mitchell, analyze those energy patterns, Parker ordered, his fingers dancing across the Thermopylae's tactical console. Mitchell's response came swift and sharp. Sir, these signatures match quantum cascade weapons similar to the prototypes from the Mars campaign. They're more advanced, but the underlying principles are identical. Admiral UMA's scales shifted as the data streamed to her display. Commander Parker, explain. Ariadenial weapons, Parker responded, transmitting tactical specifications. They create expanding fields of destructive energy. We've seen this before. The Eternal Dominion's hull pulsed with building energy as Warprince Korthak initiated his trap. Massive emitter arrays emerged from concealed ports along the Drachnid vessel's flanks. Dr. Marcus Walsh's voice cut through the command channel. Commander, I recognize these configurations. During Mars, we developed shield modifications to counter similar weapons. We can adapt. A blinding flash erupted from the Drachnid fleet. Cascading waves of quantum energy spread outward, forming an intricate web of destructive fields. the human Voth fleet found itself surrounded by a maze of writhing energy that threatened to tear their ships apart. Transmitting shield specifications to all Voth vessels, Walsh announced. Rerouting power from mass drivers to reinforcement grids. Admiral Uma, your engineers will need to, first scale Senna, implement these modifications, Uma ordered her tactical officer. Coordinate with Lieutenant Mitchell for movement vectors. The Thermopylae's electronic warfare pods activated, their interference patterns disrupting the quantum field's containment matrices. Parker's ships pushed forward, their modified shields flaring brilliant purple where they contacted the energy barriers. First-scale Senna's voice carried notes of controlled urgency. Voth engineering teams report partial shield adaptation achieved. We cannot match human modifications completely, but our systems should withstand brief exposure. The combined fleet moved with practiced precision through gaps created by the human vessel's electronic warfare. Uma watched her tactical display as Voth cruisers threaded between destabilized sections of the quantum field, their modified shields holding against the reduced energy levels. Warprince Korthak's response proved immediate. All ships, concentrate fire on the Thermopylae. Destroy their coordination hub. The Eternal Dominion's massive weapon banks unleashed a devastating barrage. Energy beams and projectiles hammered the Thermopylae's port side. Hull plating buckled under the assault. Multiple hull breaches, decks 4 through 7. Senior Chief Nathan Reeves reported from damage control. Power distribution grid showing critical instability. Parker maintained position despite the punishment his ship endured. Keep their attention focused. Admiral Uma, their defensive screen is opening up. Uma saw the opportunity instantly. With the Drachnid fleet fixated on destroying the Thermopylae, gaps appeared in their formation. All heavy cruisers, execute attack pattern Voth 7, target those openings. In the Thermopylae's damage control center, Reeves directed his teams through smoke-filled corridors. Containment fields holding at 60%, rerouting auxiliary power through secondary conduits. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut as atmosphere vented from damaged sections. Reeves studied the power distribution readouts, identifying cascade failures threatening to disable critical systems. Engineering, we need those shield modifications maintained, he transmitted. Cutting power to non-essential decks to compensate for grid instability. The Thermopylae shuddered under another direct hit. Warning indicators flashed across Reeves' display as the power grid fluctuated dangerously close to collapse. His fingers flew across the control panel, implementing emergency protocols developed through 20 years of crisis management. Chief, a damage control technician called out. Power surge in junction 4 to 7. If it blows, we'll lose electronic warfare capabilities. Reeves grabbed his toolkit. Team 2 with me. We're stabilizing that junction manually. The fleet's counting on our U systems. Above, the battle continued to rage. Uma's cruisers struck hard at the Drachnid fleet's exposed flanks while Parker's ships maintained their electronic warfare screen. The quantum fields flickered and wavered under the combined assault, but Warprince Korthak showed no sign of relenting in his attempt to destroy the Thermopylae. Mitchell's targeting data continued flowing to both fleets, identifying weaknesses in Drachnid shields. The Eternal Dominion's massive hull bore fresh scars from precision strikes, yet its quantum cascade weapons remained operational, forcing the human Voth fleet to constantly adapt their approach vectors through the deadly energy web. In the Thermopylae's bowels, Reeves reached the damaged power junction. His experienced eyes assessed the crackling electrical feeds as his team deployed emergency stabilizers. The ship's survival, and with it, the effectiveness of their combined fleet depended on keeping these systems operational. His hands moved quickly through a complex bypass sequence when proximity alarms shrieked through the damaged corridor. Multiple impacts port side. A technician shouted, "Magnetic signatures boarding pods." Reeves activated his comm unit. Bridge, we have boarders. Junction 4 to 7 is partially stabilized, but the deck plating vibrated as Drachnid boarding pods punctured the hull. Security alerts flashed across every functional display as armored hatches burst inward. Captain Michael Tor's voice cut through the ship-wide channel. All security teams, implement Protocol Victor 7. Engineering crews, fall back to defensive positions. Reeves directed his repair team toward the nearest hardened shelter. Move. Get to the emergency bunker. The sound of energy weapons echoed through adjacent corridors as the first Drachnid shock troops engaged the Thermopylae Marines. On the bridge, Commander Parker divided his attention between multiple tactical displays. Captain Torres, contain those boarders. Lieutenant Mitchell, maintain targeting coordination with the Voth fleet. He transmitted to Admiral Uma's flagship. Thermopylae is compromised. Request temporary command transfer for fleet operations. Understood, Commander. Uma's response came swift and precise. First Scale Senna will maintain your electronic warfare screen. Focus on ship defense. Torres organized his Marines across 3 decks, positioning fire teams at critical junctions. The Drachnid boarding party, led by Combat Master Razix, advanced with practiced efficiency through the damaged sections. Their towering forms filled the corridors, energy rifles spitting lethal bolts at defending positions. Engineering teams report multiple breaches, Torres announced, checking his tactical overlay. Implementing gravity control variations. He signaled his lead fire team. Prepare for shift strike maneuvers. The artificial gravity plating cycled through rapid changes. Drachnid troops stumbled as their momentum shifted unexpectedly. Marine Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen's voice crackled through the command channel. They're off balance. Hit them now. Marines burst from concealed positions, their vacuum-rated armor deflecting energy bolts. Close-quarters combat erupted in the narrow spaces. Torres watched through helmet feeds as his troops employed specialized grappling techniques, using the Drachnid's superior mass against them in the fluctuating gravity field. Dr. Walsh's voice cut through the tactical chatter. Commander, these boarding pods use Mark 7 magnetic seals. Similar to the Mars defense platforms, we can disable their docking mechanisms. Coordinate with Lieutenant Mitchell, Parker ordered. Modify our point defense grid. Mitchell's fingers flew across his console, reprogramming targeting parameters. The Thermopylae's remaining functional turrets adjusted their firing solutions, targeting specific points on attached boarding pods. Precision shots severed magnetic connections, preventing additional Drachnid troops from entering while sealing existing borders inside the ship. Combat Master Razix directed his forces with brutal efficiency. Push toward their power distribution network. His translated orders echoed through intercepted channels. Disable their electronic warfare systems. Torres recognized the threat immediately. All teams, fall back to Junction Bravo, form testudo positions. His Marines created overlapping fields of fire, their armored formations reminiscent of ancient shield walls. The narrow corridors channeled the Drachnid advance into prepared killing zones. Above, the space battle continued unabated. Admiral Uma coordinated the combined fleet's movements while the Thermopylae dealt with its internal crisis. First Scale Senna adapted human targeting algorithms, leading to precise strikes against vulnerable sections of Drachnid vessels. War Prince Korthak expanded his boarding strategy, launching additional pods at other human ships. Break their coordination, he commanded. Overwhelm their internal defenses. But the other vessels in Parker's battle group had already received Tor's tactical data. The TSS Marathon vented atmosphere from compromised sections, catching Drachnid boarders in violent decompression. The TSS Sentinel created deliberate power surges through its deck plating, disrupting enemy advance patterns. Lieutenant Mitchell noticed an anomaly in his sensor readings. Commander, detecting interference patterns between Drachnid boarding teams and their fleet's weapon control systems. Their combat armor is creating harmonic disruptions in the quantum cascade network. Walsh examined the data. The same shielding that protects them from their own weapons is limiting their neural interface capabilities. If we can amplify those disruptions. The battle for the Thermopylae corridors reached a critical phase as Razix's forces approached the auxiliary power core. Torres deployed his remaining squads in interlocking positions. Maintain formation integrity, he ordered. Use their momentum against them. The ship's narrow passages filled with the sound of combat as human ingenuity clashed with Drachnid physical superiority. Through it all, Senior Chief Reeves and his engineering teams worked to keep critical systems operational, their efforts vital to both internal defense and fleet coordination. Mitchell continued analyzing the complex interference patterns while coordinating with Admiral Uma's tactical officers. The potential vulnerability in the Drachnid's integrated combat network offered a new avenue of attack, but exploiting it would require precise timing and absolute coordination between human and Voth forces. As he compiled the data, energy weapons fire echoed through the Thermopylae corridors, testament to the desperate close-quarters battle still raging within. "Commander," Mitchell called out, his eyes fixed on the oscillating patterns across his display. These interference readings the Drachnid armors creating localized disruptions in their quantum weapon control networks. Their neural interfaces are degrading every time they fire. Dr. Walsh rushed to Mitchell's station, analyzing the complex data streams. The shielding matrix in their combat suits. It's generating harmonic feedback. If we could amplify that pattern, get me combat systems, Parker ordered, dividing his attention between the tactical overlay and the boarding action displays. Priority channel. Derek Morrison's face appeared on the command screen, his features illuminated by the glow of electronic warfare displays in the Combat Information Center. Combat systems. Morrison here, sir. Lieutenant Mitchell is sending you interference data. Can we weaponize it? Morrison's fingers danced across his console, processing the incoming information. The pattern matches disruption sequences we developed during the Mars campaign. Give me access to the emergency beacon network. I can modify our comm arrays to generate matching frequencies. Parker nodded. Authorized. Dr. Walsh, assist with the modifications. In the ship's corridors, Torres received the tactical update through his command channel. He positioned his Marines in maintenance access ways, their magnetic boots engaged. All teams prepare for systems disruption, anchor positions and stand by. Combat Master Razix led his forces toward the power distribution hub, unaware of the trap about to spring. His translated orders echoed through Marine intercept channels. Forward units, breach that bulkhead. Second wave, prepare to Morrison's voice cut through the command network. Disruption pattern active in 3, 2, 1. The modified communication array activated. Drachnid combat armor seized up, neural interfaces screaming with feedback. Razix's troops stumbled, their servo-assisted movements failing as control systems crashed. Strike teams execute. Torres ordered. His Marines burst from concealed positions, exploiting the confined spaces of the maintenance corridors. Their own systems, unaffected by the disruption field, allowed precise targeting of vulnerable joints in the malfunctioning Drachnid armor. Mitchell transferred the technical specifications to Admiral Uma's flagship, transmitting interference patterns. Their engineers will need to adjust for Voth comm frequencies. First-scale Senna's response was immediate. Adaptation in progress. Our arrays require significant modification, but the principle is sound. Warprince Korthak recognized the threat as his boarding team's combat effectiveness plummeted. Emergency protocols. Isolate cascade weapon controls from primary networks. The massive Drachnid vessels began powering down their quantum weapons, attempting to prevent system-wide failures. UMA seized the opportunity. All cruisers, close to engagement range, target their secondary weapon emplacements while their primaries are offline. Commander, Reeves transmitted from engineering. Power grid stabilized but critical repairs needed. We can maintain combat operations for 12 minutes maximum. Parker studied the tactical display, calculating engagement vectors. Understood. Lieutenant Mitchell, coordinate with Admiral Uma's targeting officers. We need to maximize damage while proximity alarms shrieked. New contacts materialized at the battle's edge. Drachnid reinforcements led by a massive vessel unlike anything in their tactical database. Fleet Master Vorax's personal signal detected, Mitchell reported. That flagship reading planetary assault weapons. They're positioning to threaten the colony. Uma's voice carried urgency without panic. Commander Parker, your assessment. Korthak's fleet is vulnerable, but the colony. Parker watched as the Worldbreaker's weapon systems powered up, its massive form casting a shadow over the battlefield. The next few seconds would determine not just the fate of the Thermopylae, but of thousands of colonial civilians. His hand hovered over the tactical controls as warning indicators tracked the new threat's targeting solutions. The combined fleet hung in space, caught between their crippled opponents and this new, devastating force. In the Thermopylae's corridors, Marines continued their close-quarters battle with the struggling Drachnid boarding parties, while Morrison worked to maintain the disruption field that gave them their advantage. Time ticked away as Parker weighed his options, knowing that every second brought them closer to both opportunity and catastrophe. Parker's mind flashed to the orbital defense of Earth, when Admiral Chen had faced a similar tactical dilemma. Splitting their forces then had led to catastrophic losses over Luna. He keyed his command channel. Admiral Uma, recommend we maintain fleet cohesion. I have a strategy to neutralize both threats simultaneously. Proceed, Commander. Senior Chief Reeves, Parker transmitted. Initiate controlled plasma venting from our damaged sections. Pattern Delta 7. Delta 7, Reeves's voice carried recognition. The Luna Gambit, sir. Exactly. Make us look worse than we are. Reeves directed his engineering teams to release precise bursts of plasma from the Thermopylae's damaged port side. The ionized gas created patterns that mimicked cascading system failures, while actually preserving their critical power reserves. Dr. Walsh studied the sensor data from the Drachnid armor interference. Lieutenant Mitchell, if we network with the Voth communication arrays, we can expand the disruption field by 300%. Mitchell coordinated with First Scale Senna, transmitting technical specifications. Routing power through secondary yield nodes. Admiral Uma will need your ships to maintain these exact positions to create the distributed network. In the ship's corridors, Torres accessed environmental controls. All teams seal suits, implementing atmospheric countermeasures. He triggered the fire suppression system in selected compartments. Dense aerosols filled the spaces, infiltrating the compromised seals of the Drachnid armor. Combat Master Razix's translated orders became increasingly desperate. Cannot maintain atmosphere integrity. His troops stumbled, their movements erratic as their respiratory systems failed. The massive form of Fleet Master Vorax's Worldbreaker approached, its primary weapon gathering energy. First Scale Senna positioned her vessels in an intricate defensive pattern, appearing to react chaotically while actually establishing precise firing solutions. Commander, a new voice cut through the tactical channel. Gunnery Chief Hawkins, I served in the Mars Artillery Division that Worldbreakers using a charged particle cannon similar to our orbital defense platforms. Parker leaned forward. Analysis. Their shield grid has to adapt during the charging sequence. Creates a predictable vulnerability, just like our Mark IV platforms. Hawkins transmitted targeting data. We'll have a 6-second window when their ventral shields fluctuate. Morrison's voice joined from combat systems. Disruption field modifications complete, ready to extend range on your mark. Parker studied the tactical display as Vorax's flagship moved into position. The Drachnid commander clearly interpreted the Thermopylae's venting plasma as evidence of critical damage. Uma's screen of ships maintained their seemingly erratic defense, while actually creating a perfect resonance pattern for their electronic warfare network. Tor's status of borders. Nearly neutralized, sir. Razix and his remaining forces are contained in Engineering Section 4. Their combat ineffective. The Worldbreaker's massive cannon began its final charging sequence. Energy readings spiked across Mitchell's displays. Hawkins called out, "Shield fluctuation in 15 seconds." Parker opened channels to both Uma's flagship and his own combat stations. All units prepare for coordinated strike. Timing is critical. He watched as the combined fleet's targeting solutions aligned with the predicted shield weakness. The Drachnid vessels, still recovering from the first electronic warfare attack, moved to support their fleet master's position. The Worldbreaker's weapon reached 90% charge. Hawkins monitored the energy patterns. Shield fluctuation beginning. "Mark. Execute," Parker ordered. Morrison activated the enhanced disruption field as Uma's ships launched their strike. The distributed network of human and Voth communication arrays generated an overwhelming surge of interference. Drachnid combat systems crashed across both fleets as the Worldbreaker's ventral shields dropped for its firing sequence. The massive vessel's weapon capacitors discharged harmlessly into space as its targeting systems failed. Uma's flagship led the coordinated attack, its guns striking precisely where Hawkins had identified the shield weakness. The Thermopylae's remaining functional weapons added to the barrage, their shots guided by the targeting solutions Mitchell had refined through the battle. Vorax's flagship shuddered under the impact. Secondary explosions bloomed along its hull as power surges devastated its internal systems. But the Worldbreaker's immense size meant it could absorb tremendous damage. The vessel's auxiliary systems began to compensate for the electronic attack, its massive guns reorienting toward the colony. Parker watched new energy patterns form across his tactical display. They had struck a serious blow, but the battle's outcome still hung in balance. The Thermopylae's damaged systems groaned under the strain of maintaining their electronic warfare assault, while Vorax's technological adaptations threatened to overcome their initial advantage. "Execute modified EMP pattern," Parker commanded. "Synchronize with Voth arrays on my mark." Morrison's fingers flew across his console, pulse configured, routing power through emergency circuits. The Thermopylae's damaged systems protested as energy diverted to their electronic warfare emitters. In engineering, Reeves directed his teams to maintain power flow through jury-rigged conduits. "Shield fluctuation in 3 seconds," Hawkins reported from his gunnery station. Parker watched the energy patterns build across the Worldbreaker's massive hull. "All units fire." The combined fleet's attack struck with perfect synchronization. The Thermopylae's electromagnetic pulse, amplified by the network of Voth communication arrays, slammed into the Drachnid vessels just as the Worldbreaker's shields dropped for its firing sequence. Warning indicators flashed across enemy vessels as their integrated combat systems crashed. In Engineering Section 4, Combat Master Razix raised his weapon only to find his armor's servomotors frozen. The Marine strike team breached the compartment, led by Torres himself. "Weapons down, your combat ineffective." The Drachnid commander's translated voice crackled with interference as his neural interface failed. His elite troops, their sophisticated armor now little more than metal coffins, had no choice but to surrender. "Commander, Doctor." Walsh called out, "The quantum cascade weapons, their containment fields are destabilizing in a uniform pattern." Mitchell overlaid the sensor data on his tactical display, feeding targeting solutions to the fleet. We can destroy them safely if we hit these exact points before the reaction spreads. A new voice cut into the command channel. Bridge, this is Wing Commander Hayes. Request permission to launch fighters. Their point defense grid is down, we can exploit the gaps. Parker studied the tactical overlay. The disabled Drachnid ships hung vulnerable, their defensive screens flickering. Launch authorized. Target their communication arrays, keep them isolated. Hayes's fighter squadron streaked from the Thermopylae launch bays. The veteran pilot led his wings through the spreading debris field, exploiting every break in the enemy's coverage. Precision strikes from their light weapons severed vital communication nodes, preventing the Drachnid fleet from coordinating their responses. Aboard the Worldbreaker, Fleet Master Vorax initiated emergency protocols. The massive vessel's primary weapon powered down as command functions transferred to secondary systems. Warprince Korthak's ships, cut off from central control, began to drift out of formation. Their fleet cohesion is breaking, Mitchell reported. Targeting solutions uploaded to Admiral Uma's cruisers. The Voth vessels struck with devastating precision, their weapons finding vulnerable points in the scattered Drachnid formation. Individual enemy ships, unable to maintain their coordinated defense patterns, fell to concentrated fire. Power spike. Reeves warned through the command channel. The U screen is pushing our grid to critical levels. We've got maybe 10 minutes before complete system failure. Subcommander Vex's voice carried across the Drachnid command frequencies as Mitchell's translation software decoded it. All vessels initiate Protocol 7 Delta. Isolate command functions from primary networks. They're adapting, Dr. Walsh announced, analyzing the changing electronic patterns. Beginning to restore partial defensive capabilities through localized control systems. Parker studied the tactical display as new energy signatures appeared throughout the enemy fleet. The Worldbreaker's massive form shifted, bringing its undamaged weapons to bear. They had to press their advantage before it slipped away, but the Thermopylae's failing power grid left them dangerously exposed. Admiral Uma, Parker transmitted, recommend immediate concentration of fire on grid coordinates 973. Will coordinate with Hayes's fighters to maintain disruption coverage. Confirmed, Commander. Moving to engage. The combined fleet's formation tightened as they prepared for their next strike. In the Thermopylae's engineering spaces, Reeves and his teams raced to maintain power flow through their overtaxed systems. Hayes's fighters continued their harassment attacks, forcing the Drachnid ships to rely on local control rather than fleet-wide coordination. Warning indicators flashed across Mitchell's display as more Drachnid systems came back online. The massive form of the Worldbreaker loomed ahead, its weapons charging as Vex's emergency protocols began to take effect. Parker watched the tactical situation evolve, knowing their window of opportunity narrowed with each passing second. Parker's eyes locked onto a new sensor reading from engineering. Senior Chief Reeves, initiate controlled overload sequence on auxiliary power systems. Route all excess energy through the U array. Sir, that'll put catastrophic strain on our remaining systems, Reeves transmitted back. Do it. We need to press our advantage now. A new voice cut into the channel. Commander, Engineering Specialist Coleman here. Request permission to implement Mars Defense Grid Protocol 73. Proceed, Specialist. Coleman's hands flew across his engineering station. Chief Reeves, we can use the damaged port vents to generate an electromagnetic interference field. The plasma leakage creates a perfect carrier wave. Reeves nodded as understanding dawned. Like the Mars orbital arrays, converting battle damage into an amplification matrix. Power readings spiked across Mitchell's tactical display as Coleman's modifications took effect. The Thermopylae's damaged sections pulsed with electromagnetic energy, extending their disruption field far beyond normal range. Wing Commander Hayes, Parker transmitted. Your fighters have a window. Use the M field for sensor masking. Copy that. Hayes led his squadron through the spreading interference pattern. All wings, form up on my signal. We're going Ghost Protocol. The fighter wings vanished into the electromagnetic haze, appearing as scattered sensor echoes on Drachnid tracking systems. Mitchell fed them targeting data, highlighting critical communication nodes across the enemy fleet. First Scale Senna's voice carried perseverance. Commander Parker, repositioning cruisers to amplify disruption effect. Her Voth vessels shifted formation, their communication arrays linking with the Thermopyla's M field to create overlapping zones of interference. Warprince Korthax translated orders echoed across the command channel. All vessels, disengage Central Command protocols. Initiate autonomous combat operations. They're struggling to adapt, Mitchell reported, tracking individual Drachnid ships as they attempted to operate independently. Their command structures too rigid for effective distributed control. A new alert flashed on Hawkins' gunnery display. Commander detecting power fluctuations in the Worldbreaker's distribution grid. Their shield harmonics match Earth Defense Force patterns. Incoming fighters, Morrison called out. New contact designated strike leader cracks launching from Worldbreaker's ventral bays. The Drachnid interceptors formed complex interference patterns, attempting to disrupt the human Voth electronic warfare network. Torres redirected his Marines to emergency stations as damage reports flooded in from multiple decks. Sir, Torres transmitted, we've accessed the captured Drachnid armor cores, feeding tactical data to Mitchell now. Mitchell integrated the new information. Got it. Their emergency protocols cracks is trying to establish localized control nodes using his fighter screen as relay points. Time to failure on power systems, Parker asked. 7 minutes until cascade failure initiates, Coleman reported. The M field is burning through our reserves. A new alert sounded across the bridge. Long-range contacts, Morrison announced. Multiple Drachnid signatures preparing to transition from FTL. Parker studied the tactical display as Hayes's fighters struck another communication node, temporarily isolating 3 enemy destroyers. The Worldbreaker's massive form shifted as Vorax attempted to compensate for their degrading command network. Time compressed around them as systems pushed to their limits. Admiral Uma, Parker transmitted, watching power readings fluctuate across his display. We need to press our advantage. Recommend concentration of fire on these coordinates while we still have our disruption field. Energy readings spiked as the Worldbreaker's weapon systems charged. Krax's fighters continued their complex evasion patterns, probing for weaknesses in the electronic warfare screen. In engineering, Coleman and Reeves worked frantically to maintain power flow through overtaxed circuits as warning indicators multiplied across their displays. Multiple system failures across decks 3 through 7. Senior Chief Reeves's voice cut through the command channel. Power grid destabilizing. We're losing cohesion on the M field. Coleman's hands flew across his engineering console as he analyzed the cascading power signatures. Commander, I have a solution. The Drachnid boarding pods, their power cells, are still active. We can tap into them through the magnetic seal points. Explain, Parker ordered, watching the tactical display as Hayes's fighters conducted another strike run. The pods carry independent fusion cells designed for sustained assault operations. If we can establish power taps, we could stabilize our critical systems. Coleman transmitted a technical schematic to the bridge, but we'll need to access the external hardware from inside the hull. Sergeant Ramirez, Torres called over the tactical net. Your salvage experience, can you make this work? Affirmative, sir. I'll need a 4-person team and emergency hull repair kits. Ramirez was already moving, selecting experienced crew members as he headed for the damaged sections. We'll use maintenance shaft 7 to reach the first pod location. Mitchell's tactical display flickered as another power surge rippled through the ship's systems. "Sir, Strike Leader Krax is establishing a signal relay pattern through his fighter screen. They're attempting to bypass our disruption field." Morrison analyzed the incoming data streams. "Got it. Their fighters are using frequency-shifted communication protocols." His fingers danced across the weapons control station, reconfiguring our yield pattern to match their transmission variants. "We can use their own relay network against them." In the confined space of Maintenance Shaft 7, Ramirez led his team through clouds of vented coolant. They reached the first boarding pod's attachment point, where the Drachnid vessel had burned through the Thermopylae's outer hull. "Watch those power conduits," Ramirez warned as his team began removing access panels. "The magnetic seal is still hot." He carefully extracted connection leads from his repair kit, matching them to the exposed Drachnid power nodes. 2 decks below, Combat Master Razix observed the tactical displays from his secured position. "Your ship will not survive," he transmitted through the translation system, "but I can help prevent unnecessary deaths." Parker studied the Drachnid commander's biosignatures. "Explain." "The Worldbreaker carries a prototype quantum cascade projector. Its containment systems are vulnerable to precise strikes. If destabilized, the effect will cascade through our entire fleet's weapon grid." Mitchell immediately began analyzing the new data. "Confirmed, sir. The energy patterns match known quantum cascade signatures if we can disrupt these specific nodes." He highlighted several points on the tactical display. "Hayes, are you receiving this?" Parker transmitted. "Affirmative. Forming mixed squadrons with Voth fighters now. We can hit those points through the gaps in their coverage." Admiral Uma's flagship transmitted new tactical data. "Establishing containment perimeter. First Scale Senna has developed shield modifications to protect against quantum feedback." In engineering, Ramirez's team completed the third power tap. Emergency lighting stabilized as energy flowed through the jury-rigged network. "Power taps active," Ramirez reported. "But these connections won't hold for long." "Sir," Walsh called out, "the Drachnid power cells are creating harmonic resonances in our mass driver systems. The frequency matches their shield modulation exactly." Mitchell overlaid the energy patterns on his tactical display. "That gives us a way through their defenses if we time our shots precisely." "Incoming," Morrison announced. Multiple Drachnid signatures dropping out of FTL in 14 minutes. Parker studied the tactical overlay, watching as Hayes's fighters moved into attack position, while Uma's fleet established their containment formation. The Worldbreaker's massive form dominated the display, its weapons charging as Vex's emergency protocols neared completion. Their makeshift repairs had given them an opportunity, but every system pushed dangerously close to failure. "All units, prepare for coordinated strike," Parker transmitted. "Targeting solutions are being distributed now. We hit their vulnerable points simultaneously when the quantum cascade signature peaks." "Execute coordinated strike," Parker ordered as the tactical plot crystallized. "All units, engage designated targets." The Thermopylae's remaining operational mass drivers swiveled to target the Worldbreaker's exposed sections. At the gunnery station, Hawkins's hands moved across his console with practiced efficiency. "Sir, the harmonic patterns from those Drachnid power cells, we can use them." "Elaborate," Parker instructed, studying the weapon's readouts. Ship's gunner Sarah Martinez stepped forward from her auxiliary weapon station. "The resonance frequencies match their shield modulation exactly. I saw similar patterns during the Earth orbital defense trials." Her fingers flew across the tactical interface. "If we tune our mass driver output to match these harmonics." "Do it," Parker ordered. "Coordinate with engineering." Martinez transmitted the specifications to Coleman Station. In engineering, warning indicators flashed as power fluctuated through their jury-rigged network of Drachnid power cells. Those harmonics will put additional strain on our power taps, Coleman reported. We're already seeing instability in cells 3 and 7. Master Technician Cooper emerged from an access tunnel, his environment suit covered in coolant residue. The power cells are showing signs of magnetic containment degradation, similar to what we saw during the Mars reactor crisis. He transmitted a series of readings to Coleman's station. We need to implement emergency stabilization protocols. Hayes's voice cut through the tactical channel. Strike wings formed and ready. Voth wing leader Kira has developed an approach vector through their interference patterns. The sleek Voth fighters integrated seamlessly with Hayes's squadrons as they accelerated toward their targets. Wing leader Kira's vessel led the formation, its sensors probing the complex electromagnetic distortions. Their atmospheric combat protocols adapt perfectly to these conditions, Hayes transmitted. Following Kira's lead now, the fighter wings vanished into the electronic warfare haze, becoming sensor ghosts among the interference patterns. On the Worldbreaker's bridge, Fleet Master Vorax recognized the threat too late. Emergency shutdown, Vorax ordered. Deactivate the quantum cascade projector immediately. But Subcommander Vex's restored command protocols interfered with the shutdown sequence. Power surges rippled through the massive vessel as its weapon systems entered an uncontrolled feedback loop. Admiral Uma, Mitchell transmitted, quantum cascade signature becoming unstable, projecting discharge vectors now. The Voth vessels moved with precision, their formation tightening as they established a containment perimeter. First-scale Senna's modified shield harmonics created an interlocking barrier of energy fields. In Maintenance Shaft 7, Ramirez's team fought to maintain power flow through their makeshift connections. Power Cell 5 is critical, Cooper reported, analyzing the containment readings. Initiating emergency magnetic field compensation. The deck plates vibrated as Martinez's modified mass drivers opened fire. Their energy signatures perfectly matched the harmonic frequencies of the Drachnid shields, cutting through the defensive screens with devastating accuracy. Direct hits on quantum cascade housing, Mitchell announced, detecting internal power fluctuations throughout their weapon grid. War Prince Korthak's voice carried urgency. All vessels, disengage and withdraw. Emergency protocols are now in effect. But the electronic warfare screen continued to disrupt their command networks. Individual Drachnid ships struggled to interpret the orders through the interference. New contacts dropping out of FTL, Morrison reported. Grand Admiral Nexus's battle group has arrived, reading multiple capital ship signatures. The Thermopylae's tactical display updated as fresh enemy vessels appeared at the edge of the battle space. Meanwhile, the Worldbreaker's power grid continued its cascade toward catastrophic failure. Cooper, Parker transmitted, status of our power network. Cell 5 containment failing, Cooper responded. Implementing emergency protocols now, but we're running out of options. The combined fleet's weapons continued striking their designated targets as Hayes's fighters emerged from their attack run. The quantum cascade projector's housing showed multiple breach points, its internal systems spiraling toward overload. Power surged through the Thermopylae's jury-rigged systems as Martinez's modified weapons prepared for another salvo. The battle entered a critical phase as multiple crises converged. The Worldbreaker's failing weapon, their own unstable power grid, and Nexus's approaching reinforcements. Power spike in Cell 5. Cooper's voice cut through the command channel. Electromagnetic interference patterns expanding beyond containment parameters. Morrison's eyes locked onto his display as familiar energy signatures scrolled across the screen. Sir, these M patterns match what we encountered during the Earth orbital defense operations. His fingers flew across the console, pulling up archived technical data. We can use the artificial gravity generators to create a localized containment bubble. Chief Henderson to the bridge, Parker ordered. The veteran gravitics officer arrived moments later, already studying the readouts on his portable terminal. Similar to the series mining operation in 47, Henderson observed, moving to the engineering station. We'll need to modify the gravity grid to generate a focused containment field. He transmitted a series of calculations to Cooper's team, initiating gravity field modifications now. In Maintenance Shaft 7, Cooper's engineering team worked to stabilize the failing power cells as Henderson's gravity modifications took effect. The deck plates vibrated at a different frequency as artificial gravity shifted around them. Containment field is forming, Henderson reported, but it's drawing significant power from our remaining systems. Lieutenant Mitchell's voice carried urgency. Sir, the World Breaker's quantum cascade projector is entering critical failure. Analysis indicates an expanding destruction sphere that will encompass both fleets and potentially reach the Voth colony. Doctor. Walsh stepped forward from her station, transmitting data from the Mars campaign. We can channel the discharge using controlled breach protocols. It will require precise positioning of multiple vessels. Admiral Uma, Parker transmitted, are you receiving this data? Affirmative. Formation Master Nexra is calculating optimal vessel positions now. Uma's flagship began moving into position as Voth ships adjusted their formation with geometric precision. Scout vessels detected, Morrison announced. Drachnid recognition patterns identify them as Commander Thrax's reconnaissance group. Hayes's voice crackled through the tactical net, establishing combined fighter screen with Voth squadrons. We'll keep those scouts clear of the formation. In the detention center, Combat Master Razix observed the sensor feeds with growing concern. Your containment strategy is sound, but incomplete. The cascade projector follows specific emergency protocols during catastrophic failure. Mitchell quickly integrated Razix's information into his tactical analysis. Sir, we can use this to refine our electronic warfare pattern. Target these specific control nodes to influence the discharge direction. The deck shuddered as Henderson's gravity containment field fluctuated. Field stability at 60%, he reported, hands moving across his console to compensate. The power drain is creating harmonic distortions in the artificial gravity grid. Grand Admiral Nexus's main fleet is deploying, Morrison reported. Multiple capital ships moving into attack formation. Formation, Master Nexra's voice carried across the command channel, maintaining precise geometric alignment. All vessels must hold position to properly channel the quantum cascade discharge. The Thermopylae's tactical display updated as Hayes's fighters engaged Thrax scouts, their combined human Voth squadrons executing coordinated attack patterns to keep the reconnaissance vessels away from the containment formation. Henderson's gravity containment field wavered again as the World Breaker's quantum cascade projector entered its final failure sequence. Warning indicators multiplied across every bridge station as multiple crises converged on their position. Power cells 3 through 7 showing critical instability, Cooper transmitted from the maintenance shaft. The gravity containment field is barely holding. Multiple sensor alerts triggered as Grand Admiral Nexus's fleet began their final approach. The Thermopylae's crew worked to maintain their precarious position in the containment formation, while Henderson's modified gravity systems strained against the electromagnetic interference from the destabilizing power cells. The quantum cascade projector's housing began to fracture, its energy signature building toward catastrophic release. Formation Master Nexra continued transmitting adjustment coordinates as the combined fleet maintained their precise geometric pattern, preparing to channel the imminent discharge away from the Voth colony. A sharp alarm tone cut through the bridge as copper-colored energy tendrils writhed across the Worldbreaker's hull. Henderson's hands flew across his console, compensating for sudden gravitational fluctuations. "Sir, the containment field is experiencing harmonic resonance with the Drachnid power cells," Henderson reported. The deck plates vibrated at an increasing frequency beneath their feet. Containment specialist Marcus Reynolds emerged from the engineering access tube, his diagnostic tablet displaying familiar waveform patterns. "I've seen this before during the lunar helium-3 accidents. The resonance, we can use it." Reynolds moved to Henderson's station, transmitting a series of calculations. "Route the harmonic feedback through the ship's structural framework. The metallurgical properties will amplify the gravitational effects." "Implementing now," Henderson confirmed. The vibrations shifted to a lower pitch as the ship's structure began channeling the resonant energy. Morrison's tactical display lit up with new sensor data. Energy discharge patterns match old terraforming frequencies. "Navigation Officer Foster, I need your expertise here." Foster stepped up to the tactical station, his eyes scanning the complex gravimetric readings. "These distortion waves follow similar patterns to the asteroid belt mapping grids. I can calculate stable positioning corridors." The tactical plot updated as Foster's calculations revealed safe zones within the quantum cascade interference. Admiral Uma's vessels adjusted their formation with precision, maintaining the critical geometric pattern while avoiding the most intense energy discharges. "Multiple contacts breaking formation," Morrison announced. "War Prince Korthak's remaining vessels are attempting to penetrate our defensive screen." Squadron Leader Wilson's voice carried across the tactical channel. "Hayes, permission to implement atmospheric combat protocols." "Granted," Hayes responded. "Show us what you've got." Wilson's fighters executed a series of sweeping maneuvers, using the quantum cascade distortions like thermal updrafts. The modified tactics caught Korthak's vessels off guard, forcing them to retreat from the containment formation. Point Defense Specialist Drake activated his modified targeting algorithms, establishing synchronized defensive grid between our vessels and the Voth ships. Energy beams and mass driver rounds created an interlocking pattern of defensive fire, intercepting incoming attacks from Nexus's advanced elements while maintaining precise formation spacing. In the detention center, Combat Master Razix pointed to a specific section of the Worldbreaker's schematics. "The Quantum Cascade Core has manual override systems, physical controls that could stop the cascade." Captain Torres reviewed the data on his tactical pad. "Cooper, gear up. You're leading a strike team." 7 minutes, Senior Chief Reeves transmitted from engineering. "That's all I can give you before our power network fails completely." Dr. Walsh's sensor readings revealed new possibilities. The Voth colony's disaster shield, its frequency modulation, could help contain the discharge. She transmitted the data to Formation Master Nexra, but we'd need to lower their defenses at exactly the right moment. Cooper's strike team assembled in the launch bay, checking their zero-gravity combat gear as Torres outlined the mission parameters. The electronic warfare screen would provide cover for their approach, but the timeline left no room for error. "Energy spike," Morrison called out. "Grand Admiral Nexus's main force is accelerating toward our position." The Thermopylae structural frame groaned as Henderson and Reynolds fine-tuned their resonance calculations. Through the forward viewports, the Worldbreaker's hull crackled with increasing amounts of quantum energy discharge, while Foster continued updating the fleet's safe positioning coordinates. Drake's defensive screen flared with incoming fire as Wilson's fighters executed another series of modified atmospheric maneuvers, buying time for Cooper's strike team to launch. The combined human and Voth vessels maintained their precise geometric formation, preparing to coordinate their containment strategy with the colony's planetary defense grid. Warning indicators continued to multiply across every bridge station as the quantum cascade projector's housing began to break apart. The Thermopylae's crew worked against the clock, knowing their jury-rigged systems would fail in minutes, while Grand Admiral Nexus's fleet pressed their attack with increasing intensity. Resonance patterns detected between power grid and quantum cascade emissions, Reynolds announced, his diagnostic tablet displaying oscillating waveforms. We can use the ship's framework as a transmission medium. Henderson's fingers moved across his console, implementing the suggested modifications, adjusting artificial gravity nodes to create channeled force pathways. Cooper, I need precise power cell output matching. In Maintenance Shaft 7, Cooper directed his engineering team to recalibrate the Drachnid power cells. Power Systems Specialist Laura Mitchell crawled through the access tube, her toolkit rattling against the deck plating. These harmonics match the feedback patterns from the Mars fusion plants, Mitchell observed, connecting her diagnostic equipment to the power grid. We'll need to implement buffer protocols to protect structural integrity. The deck vibrations shifted frequency as Henderson's gravity channels formed throughout the ship's framework. Mitchell's monitoring equipment tracked the power flow, allowing her to adjust containment parameters in real time. Tors, your team is clear for launch, Parker ordered. Use approach vector 739. The modified maintenance pod detached from the Thermopylae's ventral bay, carrying Tor's boarding team toward the destabilizing world breaker. Combat engineer Marcus Steele studied sensor readings of the battleship's hull. Multiple access points near the tertiary power conduits, Steele transmitted. The cascade interference is creating gaps in their defense screen. The pod weaved through streams of quantum energy as Wilson's fighters engaged Korthak's vessels. Strike Commander Patricia Venn's Voth squadron executed precise maneuvers through the distortion fields. Human fighters, follow my wing, Venn transmitted. These energy patterns mirror atmospheric thermal currents, match my trajectory. Dr. Walsh established a connection with the Voth colony's defense command. Colonial Defense Director Kerr's holographic image appeared above the tactical display. We can modulate our shield frequency to contain the discharge, Kerr explained, transmitting technical specifications. But the timing must be exact. Too early and we risk destabilizing the containment formation. Too late. New sensor contacts appeared at the fleet's perimeter. Gravitic signatures detected, Drake reported. Grand Admiral Nexus is deploying long-range disruptors. Gravitic Defense Officer Reed moved to Drake's station. These match the weapon systems from Luna, implementing counter-gravity protocols now. The combined fleet's formation wavered as Nexus's gravitic weapons activated. Reed's countermeasures engaged, creating stabilizing fields between vessels. Boarding team approaching target, Morrison announced. Multiple defense turrets activating on the Worldbreaker's hull. Tor's pod navigated through increasing quantum interference as they neared their objective. Steele's sensors identified a maintenance airlock partially disabled by cascade damage. Subcommander Vex has restored partial Drachnid control systems, Steele reported as the team prepared for entry. Internal defenses are online. Split into 2 teams, Cooper ordered. Steele, take Martinez and Wang. Disable those defense systems. The rest of you with me to the projector controls. The pod's docking clamps engaged with a metallic thud. Emergency lights pulsed through the Worldbreaker's corridors as the teams moved toward their objectives. Power network destabilizing, Reeves transmitted from engineering. The harmonic patterns are synchronizing with the cascade projector. Henderson and Mitchell worked to adjust the resonance channels as the Thermopylae's structural frame groaned under increasing stress. Foster updated the fleet's positioning data as quantum discharge levels continued to rise. Formation holding, UMA reported. But Nexus's fleet will reach optimal firing range in 6 minutes. The boarding team encountered their first automated defense system, a series of energy barriers blocking access to the projector control deck. Steele's team branched off, moving toward a nearby computer core. "Accessing defense protocols now," Steele transmitted. "Stand by for system override." Wilson's fighters executed another series of modified atmospheric maneuvers, drawing Korthak's vessels away from the boarding team's position. Ven's squadron led a precise attack run that forced 3 Drachnid ships to break formation. "Colonial shield modulation ready," Kerr announced. "Awaiting your signal to begin frequency adjustment." The Thermopylae's power grid fluctuated as the quantum cascade harmonics intensified. Mitchell's monitoring equipment showed critical stress patterns forming in the ship's framework. "We need to stabilize these resonance channels," she warned, "or the structural integrity field will fail." Cooper's team reached the projector control deck as Steele worked to disable the remaining defense systems. Through the armored viewports, streams of copper-colored energy continued to build around the Worldbreaker's hull. The combined fleet maintained their precise geometric pattern while Reed's counter-gravity systems fought against Nexus's disruptors. Warning indicators multiplied across every bridge station as multiple technical and tactical challenges converged toward a critical point. "Multiple hull breaches imminent," Mitchell called out from her engineering station. Her diagnostic display pulsed with cascading alert patterns. "The resonance harmonics are destabilizing faster than predicted." Henderson's fingers danced across his console, adjusting gravity containment parameters. "The power cell's output is exceeding our models. We need emergency containment protocols." Emergency Systems Coordinator James Mitchell strode onto the bridge, his tablet displaying familiar waveform patterns. "I've seen similar cascades during the orbital station crisis." Initialize Protocol 73 Alpha. Inside the Worldbreaker, Cooper's team encountered their first wave of internal defense drones. The silver-plated machines moved with unsettling precision, adapting their attack patterns with each engagement. "Standard bypass codes ineffective," Steele transmitted, his hands flying across his tactical pad. "These are learning units." Security Systems Expert Kane accessed a secondary data port. "Mars campaign protocols might work. The adaptive algorithms follow similar architecture to the automated defenses we encountered there." Kane's fingers moved across his interface device, implementing counter-protocols as the drones advanced. 3 machines froze mid-stride, their chassis emitting a low-pitched whine. "Path clear to Junction 7, Kane reported. "But they'll adapt quickly." Above the planet, Admiral Uma's fleet executed precise maneuvers as gravitic distortions warped the surrounding space. Drake's targeting systems interfaced with Voth Defense Coordinator Sierra's shield network. "Implementing rotating harmonics," Drake announced. "Synchronizing with Voth defensive grid now." The combined fleet's shields pulsed with copper-tinted energy as Nexus's disruptors created expanding patterns of spatial distortion. Power readings fluctuated across multiple vessels as they maintained the protective screen. In the colony's defense center, Director Kerr reviewed environmental systems engineer Taylor's radiation containment calculations. "The quantum cascade radiation will penetrate our standard barriers," Taylor explained, transmitting a series of technical specifications. "But we can create temporary shields using modified waste processing fields. Diverting power to secondary emitters," Kerr confirmed. The colony's defensive screen shifted configuration, creating layers of overlapping protection around critical infrastructure. Cooper's team reached the quantum cascade projector's control room, finding twisted metal where manual override controls should have been. Radiation warnings flashed across their tactical displays. "The coolant system," Steele transmitted, highlighting specific sections on their tactical displays. "We can trigger an emergency shutdown by overloading these control nodes simultaneously." Teams of two, Cooper ordered. Kane, coordinate drone suppression from here. Everyone else, mark your targets and prepare to move on my signal. The Thermopylae bridge crew worked with increasing urgency as Walsh's sensor readings revealed new patterns in the quantum discharge. The resonance is creating predictable vectors, she announced, transmitting data to Wilson's fighter squadrons. Safe corridors opening at coordinates 735 Mark IV. Wilson's fighters escorted civilian vessels through the shifting energy patterns, while Vin's Voth squadron maintained their defensive screen. Navigation specialist Brooks's voice carried across the tactical channel as he guided Allied ships through areas of failed propulsion. Use maneuvering thrusters in short bursts, Brooks instructed. The gravitic distortions create temporary gaps we can exploit. Warning klaxons blared through the Thermopylae corridors as Master Technician Cooper's readings showed critical stress patterns forming in the ship's framework. Hull integrity failing in sections 4 through 7, he reported. The power cell destabilization is affecting our structural integrity field. Damage control teams moved through the threatened sections, implementing emergency repairs as Henderson and Mitchell worked to maintain the gravity containment system. The electronic warfare suite continued broadcasting interference patterns, providing crucial cover for the boarding team. Grand Admiral Nexus's fleet closed the distance, their weapons charging as Uma and Parker coordinated their next moves. The quantum cascade's intensity continued to build, while multiple technical crises demanded immediate attention. Kane's counter-protocols engaged another wave of defense drones as Cooper's team prepared to access the coolant system control nodes. Radiation levels climbed steadily, their suits warning indicators tracking the increasing danger as they moved into position. The Thermopylae shuddered as another power surge rippled through its framework. Mitchell's diagnostic equipment tracked the spreading damage, while James implemented additional containment measures. Through the forward viewports, streams of quantum energy continued to build around the Worldbreaker's rapidly deteriorating hull. Power fluctuation in Section 12. Henderson called as another tremor shook the Thermopylae bridge. Structural integrity failing. All hands, this is Damage Control Chief Rivera. A new voice cut through the chaos. I need immediate sensor data from hull sections 4 through 9. Anthony Rivera's eyes darted across multiple displays as he analyzed the incoming readings. The patterns matched something he'd seen before during the Titan mining disaster. The power cells aren't just destabilizing the hull, they're creating harmonic vibrations, Rivera transmitted. We can use emergency bracing procedures to counteract the resonance. Field stabilization expert Mark Davidson stepped up to Mitchell's station. These readings match experimental data from the Mars campaign. We can create localized containment bubbles to isolate the worst stress points. Davidson's fingers moved across the control interface, establishing a network of overlapping force fields. The hull groaning decreased in intensity as the containment bubbles activated. Bringing secondary power relays online, Mitchell confirmed. Harmonics stabilizing in sections 5 and 7. Aboard the Worldbreaker, Combat Engineer Steele's tactical display highlighted a series of narrow maintenance tunnels. Found drone service corridors leading to the coolant system. 3 access points, minimal defense coverage. Teams of 3, Cooper ordered. Alpha team with me, Beta with Martinez, Gamma with Wang. Kane maintains electronic warfare support from here. The teams split up, moving through cramped maintenance shafts as Kane's counter-protocols kept automated defenses occupied. Steele transmitted detailed schematics based on previous Drachnid salvage operations. Above the planet, Point Defense Specialist Drake coordinated with Navigation Specialist Brooks as expanding zones of spatial distortion threatened the fleet's formation. Spatial dynamics reporting, Paul Carter announced, his experience with deep space anomalies evident in his voice. Distortion patterns match gravitational eddies from the Kuiper expeditions, predicting next formation at coordinates 8 Fertwo. Warprints Korthak's vessels fired emergency thrusters, creating dangerous ripples through the quantum cascade field. Strike Commander Ven's voice carried across the tactical channel. All fighters, adjust formation pattern Deltasven, she transmitted. Use the energy waves to maintain position. Follow my lead. Wilson's squadrons adapted quickly, their ships riding the quantum ripples instead of fighting against them. The modified formation allowed them to maintain their defensive screen while conserving power. In the colony's defense center, Director Care accessed archived files from the settlement's founding. Tailor these radiation containment protocols from the initial colonization. Can you adapt them? Accessing emergency backup network now, Taylor confirmed. Redirecting power from non-essential systems, creating layered barriers using modified waste processing fields. Chief Engineer Walsh's voice cut through the tactical chatter. Energy synchronization detected between Thermopylae's power grid and the Cascade projector. Energy Systems analyst Jason Morris studied the synchronized patterns. These match the orbital platform crisis signatures. We can use power fluctuations to influence the cascade discharge. Implementing power cycle adjustments, Henderson confirmed. Synchronizing with projector harmonics now. Inside the Worldbreaker's maintenance tunnels, Cooper's team reached their designated coolant control stations. Warning indicators flashed as radiation levels continued to climb. All teams in position, Martinez reported, ready for simultaneous override. Grand Admiral Nexus's fleet moved into attack formation as the quantum cascade projector's energy signature shifted toward critical failure. The Thermopylae's containment bubbles pulsed with increasing frequency, while Rivera and Davidson worked to maintain structural integrity. Energy synchronization at 90%, Morris announced. Next power cycle in 15 seconds. The combined fleet maintained position despite growing gravitational disruption. Through the forward viewports, streams of quantum energy continued to intensify around the Worldbreaker's hull. Initiating coolant system override on my mark, Cooper transmitted. 3, 2, 1, 1. Cooper transmitted, but his countdown halted as new alert patterns flashed across their tactical displays. Fourth control station detected, Palmer announced, his hands moving rapidly across his interface. Hidden behind multiple security layers, the override won't work without access to all nodes. The Thermopylae lurched violently, throwing crew members against their stations. Emergency hull specialist Barnes rushed onto the bridge, his diagnostic tools already scanning structural patterns. The framework's failing in a cascading sequence, Barnes transmitted, highlighting specific sections on the main display. These stress patterns match what we saw during the series mining accident. We can predict where the hull will buckle first. Rivera nodded, integrating Barnes' data into his containment calculations. Redirecting power from secondary life support to reinforce forward sections. Davidson, we need those containment bubbles expanded. Micro-singularities forming at coordinates 9 Wosven, Ross reported from the sensor station. His gravimetric displays showed growing spatial distortions around the Worldbreaker. Similar to the Mars weapon tests but more unstable. Power Distribution Officer Matthews studied the synchronized energy patterns between the two vessels. The power fluctuations follow a predictable sequence. If we time our surges precisely, we can influence the cascade buildup. Inside the Worldbreaker's maintenance tunnels, Palmer accessed a hidden terminal. These security protocols share architecture with Earth's orbital platforms, initiating bypass sequence Gamma 3. The deck plating vibrated as another wave of spatial distortion washed over the fleet. Tactical Coordinator Reed's voice cut through the command channel. Enemy fleet shifting to pattern Delta 9, predicting assault vector through Sector 12. Multiple gravitic disruptors detected, Foster announced from navigation. Creating safe corridor calculations now. Drake coordinated with Wilson's squadrons as they adjusted their defensive screen. The fighters wove through expanding zones of warped space, maintaining their protective formation around the civilian vessels. In the colony's defense center, radiation control specialist Mitchell reviewed Taylor's modified containment field specifications. These atmospheric processors can generate overlapping barriers, similar to what we used during the Ganymede crisis. Transitioning shield harmonics now, Care confirmed. The colony's defensive screen shifted configuration as Mitchell's team activated their improvised radiation barriers. The Thermopyla's hull groaned as Barnes directed emergency repair teams to critical stress points. Primary framework showing microfractures in sections 3 through 8, implementing reinforcement procedure alpha. Power synchronization at 95%, Matthews reported. Next surge window in 10 seconds. Cooper's team regrouped at a junction, studying Palmer's updated schematics. The fourth control station is behind us. Through the drone maintenance bay, Steele transmitted. Heavy automated defenses. New energy signatures flared from Nexus's fleet. Unknown weapon type deploying, Reed announced. Disruption patterns targeting our defensive screen. Adjusting shield harmonics, Drake responded, coordinating with UMA's vessels to maintain their protective formation. Ross's gravimetric sensors tracked the growing network of microsingularities. The spatial distortions are creating predictable interference patterns. We can use them to mask our approach vectors. The combined fleet executed precise maneuvers through the quantum turbulence, while Barnes and Rivera fought to maintain the Thermopyla's structural integrity. Matthews watched his power synchronization displays, waiting for the crucial moment to implement their bold strategy. All teams prepare to move, Cooper transmitted as Palmer's bypass sequences reached their final stage. We'll hit all 4 stations simultaneously when the security protocols drop. Warning indicators multiplied across every bridge station as multiple technical and tactical crises converged toward their breaking point. Through the growing chaos, Palmer's voice carried across the tactical channel. Security bypass initiating in 5 seconds. Security bypass initiated, Palmer transmitted as warning indicators flared across every tactical station. A violent shudder rocked the Thermopylae, accompanied by the screech of buckling metal. Emergency structural engineer Thomas Blackwood burst onto the bridge, his diagnostic tablet displaying cascading structural failures. The Drachnid boarding pods. Rivera's eyes widened as the pattern emerged. The hull stress is concentrating around their attachment points. Blackwood's fingers flew across his interface. The magnetic grapples in sections 2 and 5 are still operational. We can use them to redistribute the structural load. Implementing grapple reconfiguration, Barnes confirmed, coordinating with Rivera's damage control teams. Aboard the Worldbreaker, Cooper assessed his team's new tactical situation. 4 teams. Wang, take Gamma team to access point 3. Martinez, Beta team holds position at point 2. Alpha splits into 2 groups. Steele with me at point 1. Palmer leads the strike on the hidden station. Security systems analyst Peter Walsh interfaced with Palmer's equipment. These encryption protocols match patterns from the Arcturus salvage operation, initiating master override sequence. The maintenance tunnels vibrated as another quantum surge pulsed through the vessel. Kane's electronic warfare suite struggled to maintain coverage as automated defenses activated in new patterns. On the Thermopyla's bridge, energy systems analyst Morris studied rapidly shifting power signatures. The cascade projector's fluctuations follow a regular pattern. Power systems coordinator Mitchell, can you see it? Andrew Mitchell connected his tablet to Morris's station. If we time our power surges precisely, we can influence the discharge direction. Calculating timing sequences now. Grand Admiral Nexus's fleet-shifted formation. Through the forward viewports, massive structures deployed from their capital ships. Gravitic pulse projectors. Defense systems expert Harrison transmitted from the tactical station. Similar to Project Helix prototypes. Drake adjusts shield harmonics to pattern 7-3. Implementing countermeasures. Drake confirmed as Wilson's squadrons adapted their defensive screen. In the colony's defense center, warning indicators flashed across Taylor's radiation monitoring displays. The containment barriers are destabilizing. Atmospheric control specialist Robert Mitchell accessed the environmental systems. We can create an ionized particle screen using the atmospheric processors, redirecting power to tertiary units now. The Thermopyla's hull groaned as Blackwood's magnetic grapples engaged. Structural load shifting to reinforced sections, Rivera reported. But we're losing integrity in the aft quarters. Gravitational distortion patterns identified, Gravitational Physics Officer Torres announced, highlighting specific zones on the tactical display. The microsingularities form predictable corridors based on wave interactions. All teams in position, Cooper transmitted from the Worldbreaker. Walsh, status on that encryption. Final bypass sequence executing, Walsh responded. 3 minutes until automated lockdown. Through the quantum turbulence, massive energy signatures built within Nexus's fleet. Ross's sensors tracked a growing power concentration at the center of their formation. They're deploying something big, Harrison warned. Energy readings exceed standard gravitic pulse projector specifications by orders of magnitude. Power synchronization window approaching, Mitchell announced. 60 seconds until optimal surge timing. The Thermopylae shuddered as another section of hull plating buckled. Blackwood and Rivera fought to maintain structural integrity while Torres calculated safe passage through the growing network of spatial distortions. Walsh, we need that access now, Cooper transmitted as radiation levels continued climbing. 2 minutes until automated lockdown. The quantum cascade's intensity built toward critical levels as multiple technical crises converged. Through it all, Mitchell watched his power synchronization displays, counting down to their narrow window of opportunity. A thunderous crack echoed through the Thermopyla's bridge as one of Blackwood's magnetic grapples failed. Warning indicators flashed across multiple stations as the hull's structural integrity dropped to critical levels. The grapple system can't handle these forces, Blackwood transmitted, his diagnostic displays showing cascading failures throughout the ship's frame. Structural integrity specialist Carl Davidson rushed onto the bridge, his engineering tablet already interfacing with the ship's diagnostic systems. The frame isn't just stressed, it's warping. These gravitational forces are literally bending our superstructure. Davidson's fingers flew across his interface as he accessed the ship's construction schematics. We can create a temporary skeleton using support struts from the damaged sections. It won't be pretty, but it might hold us together. Implementing cross-bracing now, Barnes confirmed, coordinating with Davidson's repair teams. Inside the Worldbreaker, Walsh's security bypass revealed an unexpected complication. The override requires synchronized activation at all 4 stations. We can't trigger them sequentially. Coordination Officer Brian Matthews connected his tactical systems to Walsh's interface. I can modify our targeting algorithms to create a precision timing network, similar to what we used for orbital defense coordination. Multiple gravitational distortions forming, Torres announced from his station. His sensors tracked the merging microsingularities around the Worldbreaker. They're coalescing into larger, more stable formations. Gravitational field expert Daniel Cooper studied Torres' data. These patterns match my research on artificial gravity wells. If we combine our fleet's gravity generators, we might be able to influence their formation. On the Thermopylae, Morris's power synchronization displays showed an unexpected pattern. Mitchell leaned forward, pointing to specific energy signatures. The Drachnid boarding pods, their power cells are failing in a predictable sequence. Power distribution expert Mark Reynolds accessed Mitchell's station. If we time it right, we can use their degradation to help channel the cascade discharge. I saw similar patterns during emergency reactor venting on Mars. The colony's defensive screen flickered as precise gravitic strikes from Nexus's fleet targeted crucial nodes. Environmental Defense Coordinator Sarah Voth rushed into the defense center, immediately accessing the planetary protection systems. "We can modify the weather control grid," Voth transmitted, her hands moving across multiple interfaces. "Create layered ionization barriers to deflect their attacks." "Implementing atmospheric modifications now," Robert Mitchell confirmed, redirecting power to the colony's environmental systems. The Thermopylae's hull groaned as Davidson's emergency bracing strained against the growing gravitational forces. Through the forward viewports, massive energy signatures built within the enemy fleet as their new weapon powered up. "The quantum cascade projector has entered terminal overload," Walsh announced from his position inside the world breaker. "We can't stop it, but we might be able to control where it discharges." Commander Parker exchanged glances with Admiral Uma across their tactical displays. "If we position our vessels precisely," Parker transmitted, "we can create a gravitational lens effect. Using our failing ships to channel both weapons' energy into a controlled collision," Uma continued, already calculating the necessary vectors. "It's our only option." The combined fleet began their precise maneuvers as Matthews coordinated the boarding team's synchronized override attempt. Around them, artificially generated gravity wells merged with the quantum cascade's spatial distortions, creating patterns of force that could either tear their ships apart or provide their salvation. Davidson's emergency bracing creaked under the mounting pressure, while Reynolds and Morris worked to harness the failing Drachnid power cells. Through it all, Cooper and Torres tracked the evolving gravitational formations, searching for the perfect moment to implement their desperate strategy. "Synchronized override in 10 seconds, Matthews transmitted as the quantum cascade's energy reached critical levels. 9, 8. The Thermopylae's structural frame screamed in protest as Parker and Uma positioned their vessels at the focal point between two unstoppable forces. Around them, the fabric of space itself began to warp and twist as multiple vectors of destructive energy converged toward a single point. A metallic shriek echoed through the Thermopylae's bridge as Davidson's emergency bracing twisted under the combined gravitational forces. His diagnostic display flashed with cascading structural warnings across multiple decks. "Hull stress exceeding critical threshold," Davidson transmitted, his fingers racing across the engineering interface. "The frame's warping faster than we can compensate." Emergency hull technician Frank Morris burst onto the bridge, already accessing the ship's containment systems. "I've got molecularly reinforced emergency bulkheads standing by. We can create internal support zones to counter the harmonic vibrations." Morris's hands flew across his station as he implemented the containment measures. Massive bulkheads slid into position throughout the vessel, their reinforced structure helping to stabilize the failing superstructure. Aboard the World Breaker, Walsh's security bypass revealed an unexpected obstacle. "Final failsafe detected. We need Drachnid biometric authorization at all 4 stations." "Contact the Thermopylae," Cooper ordered. Their Drachnid prisoner might know a way around it. Combat Master Razix's face appeared on the tactical display. "During reactor breaches, emergency protocols allow override through specific signal patterns." The Drachnid prisoner highlighted key sections of the security schematic. Systems bypass specialist Alan Cooper studied the data. "These authentication sequences." They match patterns I documented during the Helios salvage operation. We can spoof their biometric signatures. Power distribution expert Reynolds's eyes widened as new energy patterns emerged on his display. The failing drachnid power cells, their degradation frequency matches harmonic patterns in the quantum cascade. Power systems engineer Jack Morrison connected to Reynolds's station. We can trigger specific cells in sequence, create a controlled energy pattern to influence the weapon's discharge vector. Morrison's fingers danced across his interface as he calculated precise timing sequences. Each cell failure will generate distinct frequency patterns. By controlling their collapse rate, we can shape the gravitational lens with unprecedented precision. Through the forward viewports, Grand Admiral Nexus's gravitic pulse projector created visible ripples in the fabric of space. Gravitational field expert Cooper transmitted rapid-fire instructions to the Voth vessels. Voth Field Master Senna's voice carried across the tactical channel, implementing planetary defense protocols. Our gravity field network will stabilize fleet positions against spatial distortions. In the colony's defense center, warning indicators flashed as the atmospheric processors reached critical levels. Environmental Defense Coordinator Voss accessed emergency systems. Outer defensive layers failing, redirecting power to critical infrastructure shields. Colony Systems Specialist Thomas Walker interfaced with the environmental controls. We can maintain minimal barrier coverage using auxiliary containment systems, implementing emergency protocols now. Gravitational Physics Officer Torres highlighted new patterns forming in the sensor data. The microsingularities are merging in predictable sequences, creating regular gravitational wave formations. Gravitational wave analyst Robert Mitchell studied Torres' calculations. These wave patterns match theoretical models from the Mars campaign if we time our power fluctuations precisely. Long-range sensors detecting hyperspace signatures, Harrison announced. Multiple drachnid vessels emerging at bearing 340. Commander Parker transmitted across the tactical network. All vessels move to final positions. Coordinate power synchronization with the Worldbreaker's quantum cascade. Morris's emergency bulkheads groaned as Davidson made continuous adjustments to the structural frame. Aboard the Worldbreaker, Cooper's team began implementing their biometric bypass at all 4 coolant stations. Grand Admiral Nexus's fleet accelerated into attack formation, their massive weapon creating expanding waves of gravitational distortion. Commander Parker and Admiral Uma's vessels moved into precise positions, preparing to channel the converging forces through their makeshift gravitational lens. Mitchell's calculations streamed across the tactical display as Morrison triggered the first sequence of power cell failures. The quantum cascade's energy signature began to shift, responding to the carefully controlled frequency patterns. Structural integrity at 12%, Davidson transmitted as another support beam buckled. Emergency framework failing. Through the growing spatial distortions, the first drachnid reinforcements emerged from hyperspace. Hyperspace as Morris's emergency bulkheads creaked under mounting gravitational pressure. A sharp ping from his diagnostic display drew his attention to an alarming new development. Atomic destabilization detected in reinforced panels, Morris transmitted, highlighting critical sections on the ship's schematic. The quantum cascade radiation is affecting molecular bonds. Emergency materials specialist William Hawthorne accessed the engineering station, his hands moving across the interface with practiced efficiency. I've seen similar degradation patterns during the Adelaide reactor incident. We can establish layered radiation barriers using modified shield harmonics. Hawthorne's fingers flew across the controls as he implemented containment protocols developed during Earth's fusion accidents, redirecting emergency power to create overlapping shield matrices. Each layer will help stabilize the affected sections. Inside the Worldbreaker, Cooper's biometric spoofing attempt triggered an unexpected cascade through the security systems. Red warning indicators flashed across his display as feedback loops propagated through the ship's network. The spoofing is creating security resonance patterns, Cooper announced, studying the rapidly changing data streams. It's triggering automated lockdown protocols. Security override expert James Marshall linked into the system, his expertise in military cybersecurity immediately identifying a potential advantage. This feedback matches emergency reactor shutdown patterns. We can amplify specific frequencies to force a core breach response. Marshall's modifications created precise disruptions in the security network. The system will interpret these signals as critical containment failures. That should trigger automatic emergency protocols. Aboard the Thermopylae, Morrison's controlled power cell degradation showed initial success. The quantum cascade's energy patterns shifted visibly, responding to the carefully timed sequence of failures. However, warning indicators flashed as power fluctuations spread through both vessels. Power grid specialist Thomas Reynolds rushed to Morrison's station, already accessing the ship's distribution network. The degradation cascade is creating harmonic instabilities, similar to what we saw during the Mars campaign's reactor crisis. Reynolds implemented emergency containment algorithms, his experience with cascading failures proving crucial. We can establish power isolation zones, create buffer regions to contain the spreading fluctuations. Through the forward viewports, Grand Admiral Nexus's fleet moved into attack formation. Their massive gravitic pulse projector gathered energy, creating visible distortions in space. Strike Coordinator Michael Barnes studied the weapon's charging cycle on his tactical display. The projector requires a full 3 minutes to achieve maximum charge, Barnes transmitted, coordinating with Squadron Leader Wilson. That gives us a window for precision strikes between pulses. Barnes' tactical network lit up as he organized their remaining fighters into precise attack formations. We'll time our runs to exploit the recharge cycle, hit them when they're most vulnerable. In the colony's defense center, Walker's reconfiguration of the remaining infrastructure created new possibilities. Colonial engineering expert Robert Mitchell accessed the industrial control systems, his experience with planetary defense networks immediately identifying key modifications. We can transform the colony's gravity generators into a stabilizing anchor, Mitchell transmitted, implementing emergency protocols. Create a fixed point for the fleet's gravitational lens formation. The Thermopylae sensors detected a new pattern as the microsingularities continued merging. Field manipulation specialist Daniel Harrison studied the gravitational wave formations, correlating them with previous research data. These natural patterns could amplify our lens effect, Harrison announced, accessing power distribution controls. If we time the remaining cell failures precisely, we can reinforce the gravitational waves. Commander Parker's tactical display showed the approaching Drachnid reinforcements, while Admiral Uma coordinated the fleet's final positions. Around them, space itself buckled as the Worldbreaker's quantum cascade reached critical levels. All teams synchronized, Matthews transmitted as Marshall's security override reached its final stage. Commencing emergency shutdown sequence in 3, 2. The combined fleet moved into precise formation as multiple forces converged. Marshall's triggered shutdown protocols, Harrison's amplified gravitational waves, and Mitchell's colony-wide stabilization field. Through it all, Hawthorne's radiation barriers strained against the cascade's growing intensity, while Barnes' fighters prepared for their precisely timed attack runs. A blinding flash erupted from the Worldbreaker's quantum projector as space began to tear around the massive vessel. The Thermopylae's hull groaned as Parker initiated their final maneuver, positioning them at the focal point of their makeshift gravitational lens. Behind them, the first wave of Drachnid reinforcements emerged from hyperspace, their weapons already charging as they accelerated toward the battle zone. Through the bridge viewports, space warped and twisted as the quantum cascade's radiation intensified. A sharp crack echoed through the Thermopylae's command deck as microfractures spread across the emergency bulkheads. Atomic destabilization detected in reinforced shielding, Hawthorne announced, his fingers racing across the engineering interface. The radiation is breaking down molecular bonds faster than our containment fields can compensate. Materials science expert Gregory Phillips rushed to Hawthorne Station, already accessing the particle containment systems. These degradation patterns match test data from the Mars campaign's experimental weapons trials. We can modify the electromagnetic field generators to create a stabilizing matrix. Phillips's modifications produced visible results as blue-white energy fields materialized around failing hull sections. The electromagnetic barrier will temporarily maintain atomic cohesion. It won't hold forever, but it should buy us time. Aboard the Worldbreaker, Marshall's security feedback loop produced unexpected results. Power surges raced through auxiliary systems as automated safeguards activated. Power distribution network entering cascade failure, Marshall transmitted. The feedback spreading beyond projected parameters. Power distribution specialist Nathan Foster connected to Marshall's station, his experience with Earth's orbital defense grid immediately apparent. These surge patterns match catastrophic overload scenarios. We can redirect the cascade through specific subsystems to enhance our control over the cooling shutdown sequence. Foster's hands flew across the interface as he implemented precise power routing algorithms. Channel the feedback through these auxiliary circuits. It will amplify our shutdown signals while bypassing automated countermeasures. Outside, Grand Admiral Nexus's gravitic pulse projector reached 80% charge capacity. Reality itself seemed to bend as its energy field merged with the quantum cascade's radiation. Strike Coordinator Barnes' tactical display lit up with new attack vectors. Strike teams, form up on designated approach corridors, will hit the charging apparatus between gravitational pulses. Strike Team leader Marcus Reynolds's fighters accelerated through the distorted space. Confirmed. Squadron leaders synchronize void warfare systems. These distortions will affect targeting solutions. The merged gravitational fields created new challenges as Reynolds's fighters executed precise attack runs. Their weapons' fire curved through twisted space, requiring constant course corrections. Field manipulation specialist Harrison's sensors detected an emerging pattern in the micro-singularity field. The singularities aren't just merging, they're forming a self-sustaining gravitational lattice. Gravitational engineering expert Thomas Morrison studied Harrison's data, recognition dawning in his eyes. These formation patterns. They match theoretical models from Earth's artificial gravity research. The lattice could amplify our lens effect exponentially. Morrison's calculations streamed across the tactical network as he coordinated with the fleet. If we time our gravitational pulses precisely, we can use the lattice as a force multiplier. In the colony's defense center, unexpected harmonics emerged between the reconfigured gravity generators and the Worldbreaker's failing systems. Industrial systems specialist Paul Davidson accessed the mining control interfaces. These harmonic patterns resemble gravitational resonance from deep-core extraction operations, Davidson transmitted. We can use the colony's industrial gravity systems to stabilize the interaction. The approaching Drachnid reinforcements deployed sleek scout vessels, their energy-dampening fields creating visible distortions. Point Defense Specialist Drake coordinated with Squadron Leader Wilson as tactical systems expert James Cooper joined their defensive network. Those dampening fields use similar principles to Mars conflict technology, Cooper transmitted, implementing countermeasure protocols. Adjust your void shields to these frequencies. It will reduce their effectiveness. Phillips's electromagnetic barriers flickered as new fractures appeared in the Thermopylae's hull. Foster's power routing algorithms triggered unexpected automated responses throughout the Worldbreaker's systems. Grand Admiral Nexus's weapon entered its final charging phase as Morrison detected signs of imminent collapse in the gravitational lattice. Commander Parker's voice cut through the tactical channel. All vessels, move to final positions. We execute the moment systems alignment is achieved. The combined fleet accelerated through increasingly unstable space, racing against multiple approaching failures as they prepared to channel the converging forces through their makeshift gravitational lens. The combined fleet accelerated through increasingly unstable space as structural warnings blared across the Thermopylae's command deck. Phillips' electromagnetic barriers flickered and failed across multiple sections, exposing the hull to intensifying quantum radiation. Atomic destabilization spreading to primary structural members, Phillips announced, his display showing cascading failures throughout the ship. The electromagnetic containment field can't maintain cohesion. Emergency containment specialist Marcus Blackwell rushed to the engineering station, accessing the shield harmonic controls. I recognize these degradation patterns from the Jupiter weapons tests. We can establish reinforcement fields using modified shield frequencies. Blackwell's fingers moved across the interface with practiced precision, creating overlapping layers of atomic reinforcement. Blue-white energy fields materialized around critical hull sections as his containment protocols took effect. Aboard the Worldbreaker, automatic security protocols activated. Maintenance hatches slid open as waves of combat drones deployed throughout the vessel's service corridors. Security drones detected on multiple decks, Foster transmitted, analyzing power distribution patterns. Wait, the cascade through the auxiliary systems is affecting their control network. Combat systems expert Richard Hayes connected to the team's tactical display. These drones use similar control architecture to Earth's automated defense platforms. Their power fluctuations create exploitable vulnerabilities. Hayes modified their equipment settings, generating precise electromagnetic pulse patterns. Time your EMP bursts to these frequencies. It will temporarily disable their guidance systems without affecting our shutdown sequence. The gravitational lattice formed by the merging microsingularities began to destabilize. Energy readings spiked erratically across Harrison's sensor displays. Field collapse imminent, Morrison transmitted, studying the degradation patterns. But these formations, they match theoretical models from the gravity manipulation project. Field theory specialist Andrew Cooper accessed the fleet's gravitational control network. We can stabilize the lattice using synchronized pulses from our combined gravity generators. The resonance patterns will reinforce field integrity. Cooper's calculations streamed to the fleet as ships adjusted their gravitational outputs. The lattice's energy readings steadied under the carefully timed pulses. Grand Admiral Nexus's gravitic pulse projector reached 95% charge, creating expanding waves of spatial distortion. Strike Team leader Reynolds' fighters struggled to maintain formation as space twisted around them. Targeting solutions deteriorating, Reynolds transmitted. These distortions are affecting our approach vectors. Void Combat Specialist Thomas Drake linked into the squadron's tactical network. Focus fire on the primary emitter array's thermal exchange nodes. I've seen similar weapons during experimental testing. They're vulnerable during the final charge cycle. The Voth colony's gravity generators synchronized with the stabilized lattice. Colonial engineering expert Mitchell's display showed power levels climbing dangerously. Colony infrastructure approaching critical strain, Mitchell announced. Power grid can't sustain these energy demands. Colony Power expert Michael Ross accessed the industrial control systems. Implementing emergency load balancing protocols, we can redistribute power through the mining facility's auxiliary grid. The Drachnid scout vessels created overlapping patterns of energy-dampening fields. Electronic warfare specialist Brian Mitchell analyzed the interference patterns. These dampening fields use advanced variants of Mars campaign jamming technology, Mitchell transmitted, adjusting countermeasures to compensate. Multiple system warnings flashed across the Thermopylae bridge as Blackwell's reinforcement fields strained against the mounting radiation. The boarding team reported reaching the final stage of their shutdown sequence, while Grand Admiral Nexus's weapon entered its firing countdown. Through it all, Cooper's modified containment protocols kept the gravitational lattice stable, creating a narrow window for their desperate plan. Commander Parker's voice cut through the tactical channel. All vessels, prepare for gravitational lens formation. Synchronize field generators on my mark. Mark. The combined fleet's gravity generators pulsed in perfect synchronization. Blackwell's reinforcement fields flickered dangerously as quantum radiation intensified across the Thermopylae's hull. Blue-white barriers dissolved into scattered energy patterns, exposing critical sections to the destructive cascade. Multiple containment failures detected, Blackwell transmitted. Atomic degradation spreading to primary power conduits. Molecular stabilization expert Derek Harrison rushed to the engineering station, his hands already dancing across the shield emitter controls. These radiation patterns match data from Project Aegis, reconfiguring shield harmonics to establish localized stability zones. Harrison's modifications produced immediate results. Crystalline fields of energy materialized around key system junctions, creating pockets of normalized space within the chaos of degrading atomic bonds. Aboard the Worldbreaker, Hayes's tactical display lit up with new warnings. Detection of recursive security protocols. The automated defense network is implementing quantum-encrypted backup systems. Security systems analyst Peter Davidson accessed the ship's command architecture through Marshall's uplink. These backup patterns, I've seen them before. During the Helios salvage operation, we discovered similar failsafes in abandoned Drachnid vessels. Davidson's fingers flew across the interface as he implemented precise counter-protocols. Channel the shutdown sequence through these tertiary nodes. It will bypass their quantum encryption while maintaining our access to critical systems. Space twisted violently as Grand Admiral Nexus's weapon entered its firing phase. The gravitational lattice surrounding the combined fleet began to destabilize under mounting spatial distortions. Field integrity dropping, Cooper announced. Lattice collapse imminent. Gravitic Systems Officer Marcus Mitchell connected to the fleet's tactical network. These distortion patterns match test data from Project Singularity, implementing counterpulse algorithms now. Mitchell coordinated with the Voth vessels, establishing a precise network of opposing gravitational waves. The lattice stabilized as carefully timed pulses canceled out the weapon's disruptive effects. Through the command deck's viewports, sleek Drachnid breach pods accelerated through the chaos of warped space. Their hulls gleamed with energy-dampening fields as they closed on the defensive screen. Multiple boarding vectors detected, Drake transmitted. Standard intercept patterns ineffective against their approach trajectories. Strike Force Commander James Walker took control of the defensive network. Switch to Mars campaign intercept protocols. These pods use similar insertion techniques to the ones we encountered during the Phobos engagement. Walker's fighters executed precise maneuvers, their weapons' fire cutting through the pod's dampening fields at carefully calculated angles. Expanding clouds of debris marked successful intercepts as the defenders adapted to the attack patterns. New gravitational conduits forming between vessels, Ross announced from the colony's control center. The quantum cascade is creating enhanced transmission zones. Field manipulation expert Thomas Reynolds studied the sensor data. These conductivity patterns align with theoretical models from the Jupiter Research Station. We can use them to amplify the lens effect. Reynolds coordinated with Morrison, establishing precise gravitational resonance patterns between ships. The lens formation strengthened as enhanced conduits channeled additional energy through the carefully maintained lattice. In the colony's industrial sector, power systems strained under increasing demands. Warning indicators flashed across Mitchell's engineering display as critical systems approached failure thresholds. Main power grid destabilizing, Mitchell transmitted. Implementing emergency load distribution. Power Systems Coordinator Andrew Mitchell accessed the colony's infrastructure controls, routing power through secondary industrial networks. These cascade patterns match scenarios from the Titan incident. The combined fleet maintained position as multiple crises converged. Harrison's stability fields protected vital systems, while Davidson's counterprotocols fought automated defenses. Walker's fighters intercepted incoming pods as Reynolds channeled gravitational energy through newly formed conduits. Through it all, the lens formation held steady, awaiting the precise moment to channel their combined forces. Commander Parker's voice carried across the tactical network. Gravitational lens at full power. Standby for primary sequence activation. Executing primary sequence, Parker transmitted as the gravitational lens stabilized. Across the Thermopyla's hull, Harrison's crystalline stability fields flickered with increasing intensity. Fracture patterns spread through the localized zones as quantum radiation penetrated the carefully maintained barriers. Atomic stability zones failing, Harrison announced, his display showing cascading breakdowns across multiple sections. Radiation levels exceeding containment parameters. Nuclear materials specialist Victor Ramirez rushed to the engineering console, accessing the shield modulation controls. These radiation patterns match antimatter containment scenarios. Implementing modified quantum shielding protocols. Ramirez's fingers moved across the interface with practiced efficiency, establishing layered quantum barriers around critical systems. The new shielding matrix generated synchronized pulses of energy that absorbed and redirected the incoming radiation. Aboard the Worldbreaker, Davidson's security bypass activated as the boarding team disabled the third cooling station. Warning indicators flashed across his tactical display as the fourth station's backup systems engaged. Final cooling station implementing quantum-encrypted lockouts, Davidson transmitted. Standard override protocols ineffective. Systems integration expert Carl Matthews connected through the command uplink. These backup systems share architecture with deep salvage vessels, creating feedback loop through primary control networks. Matthews' modifications propagated through the Worldbreaker systems. Cascading errors spread across the backup protocols as his carefully crafted feedback pattern disrupted the quantum encryption. Grand Admiral Nexus's weapon entered its firing sequence. Energy readings spiked across tactical displays as massive power draws created fluctuating gaps in the defensive screen. Multiple shield vulnerabilities detected, Walker announced, tracking the power fluctuations. Standard targeting solutions inadequate. Tactical Analysis Officer Jason Pierce accessed the fleet's targeting network, coordinating precision strikes through defensive gaps, synchronizing weapon impacts with power draw cycles. Pierce's fighters executed carefully timed attack runs, their weapons fire penetrating the momentary openings in Nexus's defenses. Each coordinated strike weakened key emitter nodes as the weapon charged. The gravitational lens formation twisted under waves of spatial distortion. Field manipulation expert Reynolds studied the expanding patterns of quantum cascade radiation. Detecting enhanced gravitational conductivity through distorted regions, Reynolds transmitted. Standard lens calculations require adjustment. Spatial dynamics specialist Eric Morrison analyzed the wave interactions. These distortion patterns match theoretical models from my research. We can use them to amplify the lens effect. Morrison coordinated with Reynolds, establishing precise resonance patterns between distorted zones. The lens formation strengthened as they channeled additional energy through the quantum-warped space. In the colony's industrial sector, Mitchell's power distribution network registered new energy signatures from the failing Drachnid systems. Detecting specific resonance patterns from degrading power cells, Mitchell announced. Frequency matches quantum cascade projector. Energy systems expert Robert Hayes studied the power signatures, initiating controlled power cell failures, creating sequential detonation pattern to direct weapon discharge. Hayes' calculations spread through the fleet's tactical network as ships targeted specific power nodes. Each precision strike triggered cascading failures that shaped the growing energy discharge. The Drachnid reinforcements launched their assault, heavy cruisers accelerating through the defended perimeter. Void combat specialist Drake tracked their approach vectors through the chaos of twisted space. Multiple formation gaps detected, Drake transmitted. Standard defensive coverage inadequate. Strike Wing Commander Marcus Foster took control of the interceptor screen, implementing void warfare protocols, maintaining gravitational lens integrity through modified defense patterns. Foster's fighters executed precise maneuvers between approaching vessels, their coordinated fire disrupting enemy formations while preserving the carefully maintained lens effect. Each engagement forced the Drachnid ships away from critical alignment zones. Ramirez's quantum shielding strained against mounting radiation as Matthew's override sequence reached the final cooling station. Grand Admiral Nexus's weapon achieved maximum charge, while Morrison's enhanced gravitational lens reached optimal power levels. The combined fleet held position at the convergence point of multiple crises, waiting for the precise moment to channel their gathered forces. All sections prepare for primary lens activation, Parker transmitted across the tactical network. Stand by for energy redirection sequence. Warning quantum shielding failure on decks 3 through 7, Ramirez announced as cascading alerts filled his display. Radiation containment dropping below critical threshold. Emergency field generator expert Marcus Thornton rushed to the engineering station, accessing the shield harmonics through his auxiliary control panel. These failure patterns indicate total containment loss in under 3 minutes. Implementing Emergency Measure 7 Alpha. Thornton's fingers flew across the interface as he established new shield geometries. Overlapping fields of azure energy materialized around the Thermopylae's damaged sections, each layer pulsing with carefully calibrated frequencies. Containment fields holding at 60%, Thornton transmitted, redirecting power from secondary systems to maintain integrity. Aboard the Worldbreaker, Matthews analyzed the streaming data from the 4th cooling station's security protocols, found it maintenance override buried in the emergency shutdown routines. Reactor Systems Specialist Paul Anderson connected through the command uplink, accessing reactor control systems. These protocols match deep space rescue parameters. Anderson initiated a precise sequence of system commands, triggering cascading alerts throughout the cooling network, simulating critical reactor conditions. Coolant purge engaging in 10 seconds. Detecting new targeting vulnerabilities, Pierce announced as his tactical display highlighted periodic gaps in the enemy's defenses, shield fluctuations synchronizing with lens formation points. Combat systems expert Brian Walker coordinated with the fleet's weapon control network, establishing precision firing solutions. Target these shield gaps during power draw cycles. The combined fleet's weapons arrays adjusted their targeting parameters. Energy beams and projectiles struck through momentary openings in Nexus's defenses, each impact precisely timed to the weapon's power fluctuations. Quantum cascade creating self-sustaining gravitational waves, Morrison transmitted as new energy patterns appeared across sensor displays. Standard lens calculations exceeded by factor of 3. Field Stabilization Officer Thomas Reed accessed the fleet's gravity control systems. These wave formations match experimental data from Mars, implementing enhanced stabilization protocols. Reed coordinated with Morrison, establishing intricate resonance patterns between ships. The gravitational lens strengthened beyond designed limits as they channeled the quantum cascade's energy through carefully maintained conduits. Power cell detonation sequence initiated, Hayes announced as targeted Drachnid systems began to fail, detecting harmonic resonance with both weapon signatures. Power systems analyst Kevin Mitchell studied the emerging energy patterns. These frequencies align perfectly, adjusting discharge vectors to create constructive interference. Mitchell's calculations spread through the fleet's tactical network. Each subsequent power cell failure added to the growing wave of energy, its carefully shaped discharge pattern affecting both the quantum cascade projector and Nexus's weapon. Multiple enemy formations approaching defense perimeter, Foster transmitted as Drachnid vessels accelerated through twisted space. Standard screen coverage compromised. Tactical coordinator James Davidson took control of the interceptor network, implementing pattern deltasven, maintain lens integrity through coordinated defensive strikes. Davidson's fighters executed precise maneuvers between approaching ships, their coordinated fire disrupting enemy formations while preserving critical alignment zones. Each engagement forced the Drachnid vessels away from the lens formation's focal points. Emergency containment showing stress fractures, Thornton announced as his overlay fields flickered. Field integrity dropping below sustainable levels. Anderson's coolant purge sequence reached completion aboard the Worldbreaker, while sensors detected Nexus's weapon achieving maximum charge. Through it all, the gravitational lens formation held steady, channeling unprecedented levels of energy through the quantum warp space. Lens efficiency at 120%. Reed transmitted. Wave harmonics exceeding theoretical maximums. The combined fleet maintained position at the convergence point of multiple crises. Thornton's containment field strained against mounting radiation as Anderson's coolant systems vented superheated plasma into space. Walker's precision strikes continued to exploit gaps in enemy defenses, while Davidson's fighters preserved the lens formation's integrity. Through carefully maintained channels of twisted spacetime, the accumulated energy of multiple weapons gathered for release. Alert catastrophic cascade detected, Thornton transmitted as his containment fields fractured. Brilliant arcs of quantum radiation penetrated the failing barriers, ionizing atmosphere across the Thermopylae's forward sections. Advanced shield systems specialist Warren Hayes connected through the emergency uplink, detecting atomic level destabilization, implementing Titan defense protocols. Hayes' fingers moved across reconfigured control surfaces as he accessed experimental shielding systems. Multiple layers of phase-shifted barriers materialized around the compromised hull sections, each operating on distinct quantum frequencies. Multi-phase containment engaging, Hayes announced. Shield resonance patterns holding at 80%. Aboard the Worldbreaker, Anderson's coolant purge triggered unexpected alerts across engineering displays. Previously dormant systems activated as ancient Drachnid safeguards engaged. Engineering systems expert Christopher Blake studied the emerging power signatures. These safety protocols match deep recovery parameters. We can redirect the cascade. Blake coordinated with Anderson, establishing precise power routing sequences through specific conduits. The quantum buildup flowed through carefully maintained channels as they exploited the Drachnid failsafe. Energy redirection stable, Blake transmitted. Cascade following designated pathways. Combat Systems expert Walker's tactical display highlighted new resonance patterns between defensive screens and the lens formation, detecting shield harmonics matching gravitational frequencies. Tactical Systems coordinator Mark Stevens analyzed the energy interactions. These gravitic attacks create usable interference patterns, modifying fleet defenses to exploit wave synchronization. Stevens implemented precise timing adjustments across the defensive network. Shield emitters pulsed in careful sequence, converting enemy attacks into reinforcing wavelengths that strengthen the lens effect. Gravitational conductivity increasing, Stevens announced. Lens efficiency rising by 20%. Power Systems analyst Mitchell tracked energy signatures across multiple weapon systems as Drachnid reinforcements pressed their attack, both weapon arrays generating predictable interference. Weapons analysis expert Robert Turner accessed the fleet's targeting network. These harmonic patterns match theoretical models, creating adaptive defense matrix. Turner's calculations spread through tactical systems as ships adjusted their defensive positions. Each enemy attack encountered precisely tuned shield geometries that redirected energy into the growing lens formation. Implementing void warfare pattern Sigma 3. Combat tactics specialist Aaron Phillips transmitted as interceptors engaged approaching vessels, forcing enemy formations into amplification zones. Strike Wing Commander Foster coordinated fighter movements through the chaotic space, multiple targets entering optimal positions, maintaining pressure on critical vectors. The interceptors executed intricate attack patterns, herding Drachnid ships into carefully selected regions where their own gravitic emissions enhanced the lens effect. Each engagement strengthened the quantum cascade's focus while preserving defensive coherence. Colony generators achieving maximum output, Infrastructure Systems Specialist Daniel Warren announced as power levels peaked across remaining systems. Implementing emergency routing protocols. Warren coordinated with Mitchell, establishing redundant power channels through surviving infrastructure. Critical systems maintained operation despite mounting failures as they balanced diminishing resources. Generator synchronization holding, Warren transmitted, maintaining essential power distribution. Hayes' experimental shielding flickered as atomic degradation spread through barrier matrices. Blake's power conduits aboard the Worldbreaker reached critical flux levels, while Grand Admiral Nexus's weapon entered terminal firing sequence. The gravitational lens formation achieved unprecedented focus as the quantum cascade projector's containment systems began to fail. Through precisely maintained channels of twisted spacetime, the accumulated energy of multiple weapons gathered for the fleet's risky move. All sections prepare for primary sequence, Stevens transmitted as final adjustments spread through defensive screens, maintaining gravitational coherence through shield synchronization, harmonics through the defensive formation. A thunderous crack echoed through the Thermopylae corridors as Hayes' multiphase shielding buckled. Arcs of quantum radiation pierced the barrier layers, creating spreading patterns of atomic decay across the port hull sections. Total shield failure in sections 12 through 18, Hayes transmitted, his display filled with cascading failure alerts. Containment integrity dropping below sustainable levels. Containment field expert Marcus Davidson accessed the emergency systems through his auxiliary control station, detecting usable power signatures from captured Drachnid boarding pods in Cargo Bay 3, initiating emergency field generation. Davidson's fingers moved across reconfigured interfaces as he established new containment parameters. Modified Drachnid field generators activated throughout the compromised sections, creating overlapping zones of carefully tuned energy that slowed the spreading atomic degradation. Emergency containment holding at 30%, Davidson transmitted. Maintaining minimal hull integrity through salvaged systems. Aboard the Worldbreaker, Blake's eyes widened as new energy patterns emerged across engineering displays. The cascade built up its creating predictable oscillations through these secondary conduits. Power flow specialist Richard Cooper connected through the command interface. These signatures match theoretical models from Project Helios. We can use the structural pathways as focusing channels. Cooper coordinated with Blake, establishing precise routing sequences through the Drachnid vessel's power network. The quantum buildup flowed through carefully selected conduits, its energy contained by the ship's own systems. Power channel integrity stable, Cooper announced. Maintaining controlled cascade through designated paths. Stevens' tactical display highlighted new resonance patterns as the gravitational lens formation achieved perfect synchronization with both weapons' energy signatures. Both discharge vectors aligning with lens harmonics. Field harmonics expert Thomas Reed accessed the fleet's gravitic control systems. These patterns match the Mars resonance data, implementing precise timing adjustments. Reed coordinated with Stevens, establishing intricate phase relationships between ships. The gravitational lens strengthened beyond theoretical limits as they channeled the combined energy through carefully maintained focal points. Detecting shield fluctuations throughout enemy formations, Phillips transmitted as Drachnid reinforcements pressed their attack. Their gravitic pulse projector is creating expanding weakness zones. Strike operations expert James Marshall took control of the interceptor network. Multiple vulnerability windows identified, coordinating precision strike patterns. Marshall's fighters executed carefully timed attack runs through temporary gaps in enemy defenses. Each strike exploited momentary shield weaknesses while maintaining the fleet's defensive coherence. Colony gravity generators producing unexpected harmonics, Warren announced as power levels shifted across remaining systems. Detection standard resonance patterns exceeded by factor of 4. Field stabilization expert Michael Mitchell accessed the defense grid through his emergency uplink. These frequencies match planetary shield configurations. We can use them to reinforce the lens effect. Mitchell coordinated with Warren, establishing new power routing sequences through the colony's infrastructure. The modified gravity generators created carefully tuned wavelengths that strengthened the fleet's containment strategy. Energy cascade patterns matching quantum discharge models, Mitchell transmitted as more Drachnid power cells detonated. Detecting predictable interference waves. Energy systems expert Daniel Torres studied the emerging patterns through his weapons analysis display. These resonances align with both discharge vectors, implementing simultaneous influence protocols. Torres' calculations spread through the fleet's tactical network as ships adjusted their positions. Each power cell failure contributed to a growing wave of carefully shaped energy that affected both weapons building discharge. Davidson's salvaged containment fields flickered as atomic degradation accelerated through the Thermopyla's hull. Cooper's power channels aboard the Worldbreaker reached critical flux levels, while Grand Admiral Nexus's weapon initiated its firing sequence. Through precisely maintained gravitational conduits, the combined fleet prepared to channel unprecedented levels of energy into their desperate defensive maneuver. All sections maintain lens coherence, Stevens transmitted as final adjustments spread through the formation, preparing for simultaneous discharge redirection. Preparing for simultaneous discharge. Stevens transmitted as a thunderous crack echoed through the Thermopylae's command deck. Davidson's salvaged containment fields collapsed in rapid sequence, atomic degradation spreading through the vessel's remaining functional sections. Emergency Systems Specialist Nathan Richards activated his command interface, implementing Project Phoenix protocols, redirecting power to prototype containment grid. Richards' experimental system activated, casting sheets of quantum-stabilized energy through compromised hull sections. The prototype technology, originally designed for catastrophic reactor breaches, created overlapping fields of phase-shifted particles that slowed the spreading atomic decay. Containment stability at 4 to 3%, Richards transmitted, maintaining critical sections through experimental grid. Aboard the Worldbreaker, Tors tracked the evolving power signatures as Drachnid cells continued detonating in sequence. Energy cascade creating unexpected feedback patterns with primary weapon systems. Power Systems Engineer Jack Harrison accessed the weapons control network. These resonance waves match theoretical models from Project Aurora. We can use the Thermopylae's reactor core to amplify the effect. Harrison coordinated with Tors, establishing precise power transfer sequences through the failing reactor. Each Drachnid cell detonation created carefully shaped waves of energy that strengthened the quantum cascade projectors building discharge. Reactor resonance achieving critical threshold, Harrison announced, maintaining amplification through controlled feedback loops. Reed's gravimetric sensors highlighted new energy patterns as the lens formation achieved perfect synchronization. Detecting power transfer between both primary weapons, energy draw exceeding projected parameters. Gravitational physics specialist Michael Warren studied the emerging signatures. These patterns match artificial gravity well experiments, implementing adaptive focusing protocols. Warren's calculations spread through the fleet's control systems as ships adjusted their positions. The gravitic lens formation drew increasing power from both weapons, creating self-reinforcing channels of twisted spacetime. Formation efficiency increased by 60%, Warren transmitted, maintaining enhanced focus through gravitational resonance. Marshall's tactical display highlighted expanding zones of instability throughout the Drachnid fleet. Enemy formations showing familiar weakness patterns. Mars campaign data confirms vulnerability windows. Combat analysis specialist Robert Mitchell connected through the tactical network, coordinating precision strike patterns based on void warfare protocols, moving interceptors into optimal attack vectors. Mitchell's fighters executed carefully timed maneuvers through the chaotic space, forcing enemy vessels into positions where their own gravitic emissions enhanced the lens effect. Each engagement strengthened the quantum buildup while exploiting temporary defensive gaps. Multiple targets entering amplification zones, Mitchell announced, maintaining tactical pressure on critical coordinates. Cooper's energy channeling aboard the Worldbreaker created unexpected interactions with the vessel's structural framework. Systems integration expert Thomas Blake accessed the engineering controls, detecting coherent discharge patterns through primary hull sections. Blake coordinated with Cooper, establishing new power routing sequences through the Drachnid ship's framework. The quantum cascade followed predictable paths through carefully selected conduits, its energy contained by the vessel's own structure. Discharge vector stabilizing, Blake transmitted, maintaining focused output through structural channels. The colony's modified gravity generators achieved unprecedented synchronization with the fleet's containment formation. Colonial defense expert James Morrison tracked the mounting strain across defensive systems, implementing emergency grid protocols, redistributing power through surviving emitters. Morrison coordinated with Warren, establishing minimal but crucial defensive coverage through remaining systems. The colonial shield grid maintained essential protection despite cascading failures throughout peripheral sections. Defense coverage holding at 28%, Morrison announced, preserving critical infrastructure through emergency protocols. Richard's prototype containment fields flickered as atomic degradation accelerated through the Thermopyla's hull. Harrison's reactor core resonance reached maximum amplitude, while sensors detected Grand Admiral Nexus's weapon achieving full power. The quantum cascade projector entered terminal discharge sequence as the gravitational lens formation achieved perfect stability, creating precisely aligned channels of focused energy between the combined fleet's daring plan. All sections maintain current vectors, Stevens transmitted as final adjustments spread through defensive screens, preparing primary weapons for synchronized release. Discharge synchronization at optimal levels, Stevens transmitted as emergency alerts flooded the command interface. Throughout the Thermopylae, Richard's prototype containment fields fractured, quantum distortions spreading through multiple hull sections. Last Resort Systems expert Marcus Blackwood accessed the emergency controls through his auxiliary station, implementing molecular binding field generators. Authorization code Phoenix 7 Delta. Forbidden technology from the Mars campaign activated throughout the failing vessel. Networks of particle emitters cast sheets of binding energy through compromised sections, creating overlapping fields that held the ship's atomic structure together at the molecular level. Binding field coverage established, Blackwood transmitted, maintaining hull cohesion through experimental systems. Emergency reactor specialist Thomas Vail studied the cascade of failure warnings across engineering displays, detecting usable plasma signatures from the reactor breach. These patterns match theoretical containment models. Vail coordinated with Harrison, establishing precise venting sequences through designated conduits. Carefully controlled streams of reactor plasma flowed into the gravitational lens formation, their energy shaped by the fleet's coordinated field effects. Plasma resonance achieving critical threshold, Vail announced. Enhanced lens stability confirmed. Field theory expert James Morrison accessed the fleet's gravimetric control systems as spatial distortions intensified around the formation, detecting self-sustaining power draw from both primary weapons, implementing adaptive field protocols. Morrison's calculations spread through the network as ships adjusted their positions. The merged gravitational lens drew increasing energy from the quantum cascade projector and Nexus's charged weapon, creating stable channels of twisted spacetime. Formation coherence holding at 68%, Morrison transmitted, maintaining position through artificial gravity compensation. Strike Force Commander Michael Drake's tactical display highlighted multiple incoming vectors as Drachnid reinforcements pressed their attack. Enemy formations entering optimal engagement range, moving defensive units to priority coordinates. Drake coordinated with Mitchell, establishing layered defensive positions throughout the fleet. Interceptor squadrons executed precisely timed maneuvers, exploiting temporary shield failures while preserving the formation's defensive screen. Multiple strike patterns engaged, Drake announced, maintaining tactical pressure through void warfare protocols. Field manipulation specialist Robert Hayes accessed the colonial defense grid as gravity generators achieved unprecedented synchronization, detecting enhanced nodal formation throughout the lens matrix. These patterns match Earth weapons data. Hayes coordinated with Morrison, establishing control protocols for the emerging gravitational nodes. Each power signature created predictable points of enhancement that strengthened the fleet's containment strategy. Node stability at maximum threshold, Hayes transmitted, maintaining amplification through colonial systems. Power Systems Coordinator Alan Cooper studied the cascading energy patterns throughout the Worldbreaker structure, detecting viable channels through primary hull sections, implementing emergency routing protocols. Cooper coordinated with Blake, establishing new power sequences through the vessel's framework. The quantum cascade followed carefully selected pathways, its building energy contained by precisely tuned structural resonance. Channel integrity holding stable, Cooper announced. Maintaining discharge vector through controlled cascade. Blackwood's molecular binding fields flickered as atomic degradation accelerated across the Thermopylae's hull. Vale's plasma venting achieved maximum amplitude, while both primary weapons entered terminal firing sequence. Through precisely maintained gravitational conduits, the combined fleet prepared to channel unprecedented levels of energy into their final defensive maneuver. All sections report status, Stevens transmitted, as the gravitational lens formation achieved perfect stability. Drachnid reinforcements moved into attack position, while energy levels throughout both weapons reached critical threshold. The fleet's risky move entered its final phase as carefully laid plans collided with the mounting chaos of battle. Mounting chaos of battle. The Thermopylae's hull groaned under the strain as Blackwood's molecular binding fields manifested in brilliant lattices across compromised sections. Through the command deck's viewports, the energy matrix created an ethereal web of light that held the failing vessel together. Vale's voice cut through a cascade of system alerts. Plasma resonance reaching terminal amplitude, channeling reactor output through designated conduits now. Streams of blue-white plasma surged through the carefully plotted pathways, merging with the gravitational lens formation. The very fabric of space warped visibly around the fleet as the plasma energy integrated with the synchronized gravity fields. Energy conversion efficiency at maximum, Cooper transmitted from his station aboard the Worldbreaker. Redirecting structural power flow to support cascade channels. The massive Drachnid vessel's framework hummed with contained power as Cooper's calculations guided the building quantum energies through its superstructure. Holographic displays showed the cascade reaching critical levels throughout the ship's primary weapon systems. Morrison's hands flew across his control interface, coordinating with the Voth fleet's gravity generators. Lens formation achieving perfect geometry. Spatial distortion matrix locked in position. Between the opposing fleets, space itself seemed to fold and twist as the combined gravitational fields created an invisible funnel of warped physics. Drake's remaining fighters executed precision maneuvers around the formation's perimeter, their weapons' fire keeping the approaching Drachnid reinforcements at bay. Defensive screen holding, Drake announced. Strike teams maintaining containment positions. Hayes monitored the building energy signatures as both weapons prepared to fire. Quantum cascade projector entering discharge phase. Vector calculations confirmed. The Worldbreaker's primary weapon activated first, releasing a torrent of reality-warping energy that illuminated the battlefield with otherworldly light. Hayes's commands guided the destructive force through the gravitational lens, bending its path along exact coordinates. Cascade successfully redirected, Hayes transmitted. Secondary weapon discharge incoming. Grand Admiral Nexus's gravitic pulse weapon fired an instant later, its massive energy beam intersecting perfectly with the redirected quantum cascade. The combined forces created a blinding reaction that followed Hayes's predicted patterns with devastating precision. The merged discharge tore through the Drachnid fleet in expanding waves of quantum disruption. Ships vanished in rapid sequence as their own weapons' power, amplified and redirected by the gravitational lens, consumed their formation. Nexus's flagship disappeared in a burst of light that momentarily outshone the system's star. Primary targets neutralized, Mitchell reported as the energy wave dissipated, confirming multiple hostile signatures lost. The Thermopylae's binding fields flickered and failed, but Blackwood's calculations proved precise. Emergency systems engaged microseconds before total structural collapse, preserving the vessel's critical sections. Molecular containment offline but hull integrity holding, Blackwood transmitted. Primary structure stabilized through backup systems. Aboard the Worldbreaker, Cooper tracked the massive ship's dying systems. Quantum cascade projector entering permanent shutdown. Power core disconnected. Medical specialist Sarah Mitchell's voice joined the command channel. Emergency response teams deploying to critical areas, beginning immediate casualty recovery operations. Colonial recovery expert Martinez coordinated with approaching Voth engineering vessels, establishing priority repair sequences for colony infrastructure. Defensive grid restoration underway. Through the clearing debris field, Admiral Uma's flagship moved into formation alongside the surviving human vessels. The combined fleet's positions adjusted to secure the sector as rescue operations spread throughout